Chapter 21. The King's Friend. Fouquet was waiting with anxiety. He had already sent away many of his servants and friends, who, anticipating the usual hour of his ordinary receptions, had called at his door to inquire after him. Preserving the utmost silence respecting the danger which hung suspended by a hair above his head, he only asked them, as he did every one indeed who came to the door, where Aramis was. When he saw D'Artagnan return, and when he perceived the Bishop of Vannes behind him, he could hardly restrain his delight. It was fully equal to his previous uneasiness. The mere sight of Aramis was a complete compensation to the surintendant for the unhappiness he had undergone in his arrest. The prelate was silent and grave, D'Artagnan completely bewildered by such an accumulation of events. "Well, Captain, so you have brought M. de Herblay to me. And something better still, Monseigneur? What is that?" "Liberty. I am free." "Yes, by the king's order." Fouquet resumed his usual serenity, that he might interrogate Aramis with a look. "Oh, yes, you can thank M. l'Évêque de Vannes," pursued D'Artagnan, "for it is indeed to him that you owe the change that has taken place in the king." "Oh," said Fouquet, more humiliated at the service than grateful at its success. "But you," continued D'Artagnan, addressing Aramis, "you who have become M. Fouquet's protector and patron, can you not do something for me?" "Anything in the wide world you like, my friend," replied the bishop in his calmest tones. "One thing only then, and I shall be perfectly satisfied. How on earth did you manage to become the favorite of the king, you who have never spoken to him more than twice in your life?" "From a friend such as you are," said Aramis, "I cannot conceal anything." "Ah, very good, tell me then." "Very well. You think that I have seen the king only twice, whilst the fact is I have seen him more than 100 times. Only we have kept it very secret, that is all." And without trying to remove the color which at this revelation made D'Artagnan's face flush scarlet, Aramis turned towards M. Fouquet, who was as much surprised as the Musketeer. "Monseigneur," he resumed, "the king desires me to inform you that he is more than ever your friend, and that your beautiful fate, so generously offered by you on his behalf, has touched him to the very heart." And thereupon he saluted M. Fouquet with so much reverence of manner, that the latter, incapable of understanding a man whose diplomacy was of so prodigious a character, remained incapable of uttering a single syllable, and equally incapable of thought or movement. D'Artagnan fancied he perceived that these two men had something to say to each other, and he was about to yield to that feeling of instinctive politeness which in such a case hurries a man towards the door, when he feels his presence is an inconvenience for others. But his eager curiosity, spurred on by so many mysteries, counseled him to remain. Aramis thereupon turned towards him and said in a quiet tone, "You will not forget, my friend, the king's order respecting those whom he intends to receive this morning on rising." These words were clear enough, and the Musketeer understood them. He therefore bowed to Fouquet and then to Aramis, to the latter with a slight admixture of ironical respect, and disappeared. No sooner had he left than Fouquet, whose impatience had hardly been able to wait for that moment, darted towards the door to close it, and then returning to the bishop he said, "My dear d'Herblay, I think it now high time you should explain all that has passed, for in plain and honest truth, I do not understand anything." "We will explain all that to you," said Aramis, sitting down and making Fouquet sit down also. "Where shall I begin?" "With this first of all. Why does the king set me at liberty?" "You ought rather to ask me what his reason was for having you arrested. Since my arrest I have had time to think over it, and my idea is that it arises out of some slight feeling of jealousy. My fate put M. Colbert out of temper, and M. Colbert discovered some cause of complaint against me, Belle-Isle for instance." "No, there is no question at all just now of Belle-Isle." "What is it then?" "Do you remember those receipts for 13 millions which M. de Mazarin contrived to steal from you?" "Yes, of course." "Well, you are pronounced a public robber." "Good heavens!" "Oh, that is not all. Do you also remember that letter you wrote to Lavalier?" "Alas! Yes." "And that proclaims you a traitor and a suborner. Why should he have pardoned me then?" "We have not yet arrived at that part of our argument. I wish you to be quite convinced of the fact itself. Observe this well. The king knows you to be guilty of an appropriation of public funds. Of course I know that you have done nothing of the kind, but, at all events, the king has seen the receipts, and he can do no other than believe you are incriminated." "I beg your pardon, I do not see." "You will see presently, though. The king, moreover, having read your love letter to Lavalier, and the offers you there made her, cannot retain any doubt of your intentions with regard to that young lady. You will admit that, I suppose?" "Certainly." "Pray conclude." "In the fewest words." "The king, we may henceforth assume, is your powerful, implacable, and eternal enemy. Agreed. But am I then so powerful that he has not dared to sacrifice me, notwithstanding his hatred, with all the means which my weakness or my misfortunes may have given him as a hold upon me? It is clear beyond all doubt, pursued Aramis coldly, that the king has quarreled with you irreconcilably. But since he has absolved me, do you believe it likely? Asked the bishop with a searching look. Without believing in his sincerity, I believe it in the accomplished fact. Aramis slightly shrugged his shoulders. But why then should Louis XIV have commissioned you to tell me what you have just stated? The king charged me with no message for you. With nothing, said the superintendent, stupefied. But that order— Oh, yes, you are quite right. There is an order, certainly, and these words were pronounced by Aramis in so strange a tone that Fouquet could not resist starting. You are concealing something from me, I see. What is it? Aramis softly rubbed his white fingers over his chin, but said nothing. Does the king exile me? Do not act as if you were playing at the game children play at when they have to try and guess where a thing has been hidden, and are informed by a bell being rung when they are approaching near to it or going away from it. Speak then. Guess. You alarm me. Bah. That is because you have not guessed then. What did the king say to you? In the name of our friendship, do not deceive me. The king has not said one word to me. You are killing me with impatience, D'Herblay. Am I still superintendent? As long as you like. But what extraordinary empire have you so suddenly acquired over His Majesty's mind? Ah, that's the point. He does your bidding? I believe so. It is hardly credible. So anyone would say. D'Herblay, by our alliance, by our friendship, by everything you hold dearest in the world, speak openly, I implore you. By what means have you succeeded in overcoming Louis XIV, as prejudices, for he did not like you, I am certain. The king will like me now, said Aramis, laying stress upon the last word. You have something particular, then, between you? Yes. A secret, perhaps? A secret. A secret of such a nature as to change His Majesty's interests? You are, indeed, a man of superior intelligence, Monseigneur, and have made a particularly accurate guess. I have, in fact, discovered a secret of a nature to change the interests of the King of France. Ah, said Fouquet with the reserve of a man who does not wish to ask any more questions. And you shall judge of it yourself, pursued Aramis, and you shall tell me if I am mistaken with regard to the importance of this secret. I am listening, since you are good enough to unbosom yourself to me, only do not forget that I have asked you about nothing which it may be indiscreet in you to communicate. Aramis seemed for a moment as if he were collecting himself. Do not speak, said Fouquet, there is still time enough. Do you remember, said the bishop, casting down his eyes, the birth of Louis XIV? As if it were yesterday. Have you ever heard anything particular respecting his birth? Nothing, except that the king was not really the son of Louis XIII. That does not matter to us or the kingdom either. He is the son of his father, says the French law, whose father is recognized by law. True, but it is a grave matter when the quality of races is called into question. A merely secondary question after all. So that, in fact, you have never learned or heard anything in particular. Nothing. That is where my secret begins. The queen, you must know, instead of being delivered of a son, was delivered of twins. Fouquet looked up suddenly as he replied. And the second is dead? You will see. These twins seemed likely to be regarded as the pride of their mother and the hope of France. But the weak nature of the king, his superstitious feelings, made him apprehend a series of conflicts between two children whose rights were equal. So he put out of the way, he suppressed, one of the twins. Suppressed, do you say? Have patience. Both the children grew up, the one on the throne, whose minister you are, the other, who is my friend, in gloom and isolation. Good heavens! What are you saying, Monsieur D'Herblay? And what is this poor prince doing? Ask me rather, what has he done? Yes, yes. He was brought up in the country, and then thrown into a fortress which goes by the name of the Bastille. Is it possible? Cried the superintendent, clasping his hands. The one was the most fortunate of men, the other the most unhappy and miserable of all living beings. Does his mother not know this? Anne of Austria knows it all. And the king? Knows absolutely nothing. So much the better, said Fouquet. This remark seemed to make a great impression on Aramis. He looked at Fouquet with the most anxious expression of countenance. I beg your pardon, I interrupted you, said Fouquet. I was saying, resumed Aramis, that this poor prince was the unhappiest of human beings, when heaven, whose thoughts are over all his creatures, undertook to come to his assistance. Oh, in what way? Tell me. You will see. The reigning king, I say the reigning king, you can guess very well why. No. Why? Because both of them, being legitimate princes, ought to have been kings. Is not that your opinion? It is, certainly. Unreservedly? Most unreservedly, twins are one person in two bodies. I am pleased that a legist of your learning and authority should have pronounced such an opinion. It is agreed then that each of them possessed equal rights, is it not? Incontestably. But, gracious heavens, what an extraordinary circumstance. We are not at the end of it yet. Patience. Oh, I shall find patience enough. Heaven wished to raise up for that oppressed child an avenger, or a supporter, or vindicator, if you prefer it. It happened that the reigning king, the usurper, you are quite of my opinion, I believe, that it is an act of usurpation quietly to enjoy, and selfishly to assume the right over, an inheritance to which a man has only half a right. Yes, usurpation is the word. In that case I continue. It was heaven's will that the usurper should possess, in the person of his first minister, a man of great talent, of large and generous nature. Well, well, said Fouquet, I understand you. You have relied upon me to repair the wrong which has been done to this unhappy brother of Louis XIV. You have thought well, I will help you. I thank you, D'Herblay, I thank you. Oh no, it is not that at all. You have not allowed me to finish, said Aramis, perfectly unmoved. I will not say another word then. Fouquet, I was observing, the minister of the reigning sovereign, was suddenly taken into the greatest aversion, and menaced with the ruin of his fortune, loss of liberty, loss of life even, by intrigue and personal hatred, to which the king gave too readily an attentive ear. But heaven permits, still however, out of consideration for the unhappy prince who had been sacrificed, that M. Fouquet should in his turn have a devoted friend who knew this state secret, and felt that he possessed strength and courage enough to divulge this secret, after having had the strength to carry it locked up in his own heart for 20 years. Go no farther, said Fouquet, full of generous feelings. I understand you and can guess everything now. You went to see the king when the intelligence of my arrest reached you. You implored him, he refused to listen to you. Then you threatened him with that secret, threatened to reveal it, and Louis XIV, alarmed at the risk of its betrayal, granted to the terror of your indiscretion what he refused to your generous intercession. I understand, you have the king in your power, I understand. You understand nothing, as yet, replied Aramis, and again you interrupt me. Then too, allow me to observe that you pay no attention to logical reasoning, and seem to forget what you ought most to remember. What do you mean? You know upon what I laid the greatest stress at the beginning of our conversation? Yes, His Majesty's hate, invincible hate for me. Yes, but what feeling of hate could resist the threat of such a revelation? Such a revelation, do you say? That is the very point where your logic fails you. What? Do you suppose that if I had made such a revelation to the king, I should have been alive now? It is not 10 minutes ago that you were with the king. That may be. He might not have had the time to get me killed outright, but he would have had the time to get me gagged and thrown in a dungeon. Come, show a little consistency in your reasoning, mordieu. And by the mere use of this word, which was so thoroughly his old Musketeer's expression, forgotten by one who never seemed to forget anything, Fouquet could not but understand to what a pitch of exaltation the calm, impenetrable Bishop of Vannes had wrought himself. He shuddered. And then, replied the latter after having mastered his feelings, should I be the man I really am, should I be the true friend you believe me, if I were to expose you, whom the king already hates so bitterly, to a feeling more than ever to be dreaded in that young man? To have robbed him is nothing, to have addressed the woman he loves is not much, but to hold in your keeping both his crown and his honor, why, he would pluck out your heart with his own hands. You have not allowed him to penetrate your secret, then? I would sooner, far sooner, have swallowed at one draught all the poisons that Mithridates drank in 20 years, in order to try and avoid death, than have betrayed my secret to the king. What have you done, then? Now we are coming to the point, Monseigneur. I think I shall not fail to excite in you a little interest. You are listening, I hope. How can you ask me if I am listening? Go on. Aramis walked softly all round the room, satisfied himself that they were alone, and that all was silent, and then returned and placed himself close to the armchair in which Fouquet was seated, awaiting with the deepest anxiety the revelation he had to make. I forgot to tell you, resumed Aramis, addressing himself to Fouquet, who listened to him with the most absorbed attention. I forgot to mention a most remarkable circumstance respecting these twins, namely, that God had formed them so startlingly, so miraculously like each other, that it would be utterly impossible to distinguish the one from the other. Their own mother would not be able to distinguish them. "Is it possible?" exclaimed Fouquet. "The same noble character in their features, the same carriage, the same stature, the same voice. But their thoughts? Degree of intelligence? Their knowledge of human life? There is inequality there, I admit, Monseigneur. Yes, for the prisoner of the Bastille is most incontestably superior in every way to his brother, and if, from his prison, this unhappy victim were to pass to the throne, France would not, from the earliest period of its history perhaps, have had a master more powerful in genius and nobility of character." Fouquet buried his face in his hands, as if he were overwhelmed by the weight of this immense secret. Aramis approached him. "There is a further inequality," he said, continuing his work of temptation, "an inequality which concerns yourself, Monseigneur, between the twins, both sons of Louis XIII. Namely, the last comer does not know M. Colbert." Fouquet raised his head immediately. His features were pale and distorted. The bolt had hit its mark, not his heart but his mind and comprehension. "I understand you," he said to Aramis. "You are proposing a conspiracy to me?" "Something like it. One of those attempts which, as you said at the beginning of this conversation, alters the fate of empires? And of superintendents too. Yes, Monseigneur. In a word, you propose that I should agree to the substitution of the son of Louis XIII, who is now a prisoner in the Bastille, for the son of Louis XIII, who is at this moment asleep in the chamber of Morpheus?" Aramis smiled with the sinister expression of the sinister thought which was passing through his brain. "Exactly," he said. "Have you thought," continued Fouquet, becoming animated with that strength of talent which in a few seconds originates and matures the conception of a plan, and with that largeness of view which foresees all consequences, and embraces every result at a glance, "have you thought that we must assemble the nobility, the clergy, and the third estate of the realm, that we shall have to depose the reigning sovereign, to disturb by so frightful a scandal the tomb of their dead father, to sacrifice the life, the honor of a woman, and of Austria, the life and peace of mind and heart of another woman, Maria Theresa, and suppose that it were all done, if we were to succeed in doing it?" "I do not understand you," continued Aramis coldly. "There is not a single syllable of sense in all you have just said." "What?" said the superintendent, surprised. "A man like you refused to view the practical bearing of the case. Do you confine yourself to the childish delight of a political illusion, and neglect the chances of its being carried into execution? In other words, the reality itself, is it possible?" "My friend," said Aramis, emphasizing the word with a kind of disdainful familiarity, "what does heaven do in order to substitute one king for another?" "Heaven!" exclaimed Fouquet. "Heaven gives directions to its agent, who seizes upon the doomed victim, hurries him away, and seats the triumphant rival on the empty throne. But you forget that this agent is called death. Monsieur de Herblay, in heaven's name, tell me if you have had the idea." "There is no question of that, Monseigneur. You are going beyond the object in view." "Who spoke of Louis XIV as death? Who spoke of adopting the example which heaven sets in following out the strict execution of its decrees? No, I wish you to understand that heaven effects its purposes without confusion or disturbance, without exciting comment or remark, without difficulty or exertion, and that men, inspired by heaven, succeed like heaven itself, in all their undertakings, in all they attempt, in all they do." "What do you mean?" "I mean, my friend," returned Aramis, with the same intonation on the word friend that he had applied to it the first time, "I mean that if there has been any confusion, scandal, and even effort in the substitution of the prisoner for the king, I defy you to prove it." "What?" cried Fouquet, whiter than the handkerchief with which he wiped his temples. "What do you say?" "Go to the king's apartment," continued Aramis tranquilly, "and you who know the mystery, I defy even you to perceive that the prisoner of the Bastille is lying in his brother's bed." "But the king," stammered Fouquet, seized with horror at the intelligence. "What king?" said Aramis in his gentlest tone. "The one who hates you or the one who likes you?" "The king of yesterday. The king of yesterday. Be quite easy on that score. He has gone to take the place in the Bastille which his victim occupied for so many years." "Great God! And who took him there?" "I." "You?" "Yes, and in the simplest way. I carried him away last night. While he was descending into midnight, the other was ascending into day. I do not think there has been any disturbance whatever. A flash of lightning without thunder awakens nobody." Fouquet uttered a thick, smothered cry as if he had been struck by some invisible blow, and clasping his head between his clenched hands, he murmured, "You did that? Cleverly enough too. What do you think of it? You dethroned the king?" Imprisoned him too? Yes, that has been done. And such an action was committed here at Vaux? Yes, here at Vaux in the chamber of Morpheus. It would almost seem that it had been built in anticipation of such an act. And at what time did it occur? Last night, between 12 and 1 o'clock. Fouquet made a movement as if he were on the point of springing upon Aramis. He restrained himself. At Vaux, under my roof, he said in a half-strangled voice. I believe so. For it is still your house, and it is likely to continue so, since M. Colbert cannot rob you of it now. It was under my roof, then, monsieur, that you committed this crime? This crime? Said Aramis, stupefied. This abominable crime, pursued Fouquet, becoming more and more excited. This crime more execrable than an assassination. This crime which dishonors my name forever, and entails upon me the horror of posterity. You are not in your senses, monsieur, replied Aramis in an irresolute tone of voice. You are speaking too loudly, take care. I will call out so loudly, that the whole world shall hear me. Monsieur Fouquet, take care. Fouquet turned round towards the prelate, whom he looked at full in the face. You have dishonored me, he said, in committing so foul an act of treason, so heinous a crime upon my guest, upon one who was peacefully reposing beneath my roof. Woe is me. Woe to the man, rather, who beneath your roof meditated the ruin of your fortune, your life. Do you forget that? He was my guest, my sovereign. Aramis rose, his eyes literally bloodshot, his mouth trembling convulsively. Have I a man out of his senses to deal with? He said. You have an honorable man to deal with. You are mad. A man who will prevent you consummating your crime. You are mad, I say. A man who would sooner, far sooner die, who would kill you even rather than allow you to complete his dishonor. And Fouquet snatched up his sword, which D'Artagnan had placed at the head of his bed, and clenched it resolutely in his hand. Aramis frowned, and thrust his hand into his breast as if in search of a weapon. This movement did not escape Fouquet, who, full of nobleness and pride in his magnanimity, threw his sword to a distance from him, and approached Aramis so close as to touch his shoulder with his disarmed hand. Monsieur, he said, I would sooner die here on the spot than survive this terrible disgrace, and if you have any pity left for me, I entreat you to take my life. Aramis remained silent and motionless. You do not reply? Said Fouquet. Aramis raised his head gently, and a glimmer of hope might be seen once more to animate his eyes. Reflect, monseigneur, he said, upon everything we have to expect. As the matter now stands, the king is still alive, and his imprisonment saves your life. Yes, replied Fouquet, you may have been acting on my behalf, but I will do not accept your services. But first of all, I do not wish your ruin. You will leave this house. Aramis stifled the exclamation which almost escaped his broken heart. I am hospitable towards all who are dwellers beneath my roof, continued Fouquet, with an air of inexpressible majesty. You will not be more fatally lost than he whose ruin you have consummated. You will be so, said Aramis in a hoarse, prophetic voice. You will be so, believe me. I accept the augury, Monsieur de Herblay, but nothing shall prevent me, nothing shall stop me. You will leave Vaux, you must leave France. I give you 4 hours to place yourself out of the king's reach. 4 hours? Said Aramis, scornfully and incredulously. Upon the word of Fouquet, no one shall follow you before the expiration of that time. You will therefore have 4 hours advance of those whom the king may wish to dispatch after you. 4 hours, repeated Aramis in a thick, smothered voice. It is more than you will need to get on board a vessel and flee to Belle-Isle, which I give you as a place of refuge. Ah, murmured Aramis. Belle-Isle is as much mine for you as Vaux is mine for the king. Go, D'Herblay, go. As long as I live, not a hair of your head shall be injured. Thank you, said Aramis with a cold irony of manner. Go at once, then, and give me your hand before we both hasten away, you to save your life, I to save my honor. Aramis withdrew from his breast the hand he had concealed there. It was stained with his blood. He had dug his nails into his flesh, as if in punishment for having nursed so many projects, more vain, insensate, and fleeting than the life of the man himself. Fouquet was horror-stricken, and then his heart smote him with pity. He threw open his arms as if to embrace him. I had no arms, murmured Aramis, as wild and terrible in his wrath as the shade of Dido. And then, without touching Fouquet's hand, he turned his head aside and stepped back a pace or two. His last word was an imprecation, his last gesture a curse, which his blood-stained hand seemed to invoke, as it sprinkled on Fouquet's face a few drops of blood which flowed from his breast. And both of them darted out of the room by the secret staircase which led down to the inner courtyard. Fouquet ordered his best horses, while Aramis paused at the foot of the staircase which led to Porthos's apartment. He reflected profoundly and for some time, while Fouquet's carriage left the courtyard at full gallop. "Shall I go alone?" said Aramis to himself, "or warn the prince?" Fury. Warn the prince and then, do what? Take him with me? To carry this accusing witness about with me everywhere? War too would follow, civil war implacable in its nature. And without any resource save myself, it is impossible. What could he do without me? Without me he will be utterly destroyed. Yet who knows, let destiny be fulfilled, condemned he was, let him remain so then. Good or evil spirit, gloomy and scornful power, whom men call the genius of humanity, thou art a power more restlessly uncertain, more baselessly useless than wild mountain wind. Chance thou term'st thyself, but thou art nothing. Thou inflamest everything with thy breath, crumblest mountains at thy approach, and suddenly art thyself destroyed at the presence of the cross of dead wood behind which stand another power invisible like thyself, whom thou deniest perhaps, but whose avenging hand is on thee, and hurls thee in the dust dishonored and unnamed. Lost, I am lost. What can be done? Flee to Belle-Isle? Yes, and leave Porthos behind me to talk and relate the whole affair to every one. Porthos too, who will have to suffer for what he has done. I will not let poor Porthos suffer. He seems like one of the members of my own frame, and his grief or misfortune would be mine as well. Porthos shall leave with me and shall follow my destiny. It must be so. And Aramis, apprehensive of meeting anyone to whom his hurried movements might appear suspicious, ascended the staircase without being perceived. Porthos, so recently returned from Paris, was already in a profound sleep. His huge body forgot its fatigue as his mind forgot its thoughts. Aramis entered, light as a shadow, and placed his nervous grasp on the giant's shoulder. "Come, Porthos," he cried, "come." Porthos obeyed, rose from his bed, opened his eyes, even before his intelligence seemed to be aroused. "We leave immediately," said Aramis. "Ah," returned Porthos. "We shall go mounted and faster than we have ever gone in our lives." "Ah," repeated Porthos. "Dress yourself, my friend." And he helped the giant to dress himself, and thrust his gold and diamonds into his pocket. Whilst he was thus engaged, a slight noise attracted his attention, and on looking up, he saw D'Artagnan watching them through the half-open door. Aramis started. "What the devil are you doing there in such an agitated manner?" said the Musketeer. "Hush," said Porthos. "We are going off on a mission of great importance," added the bishop. "You are very fortunate," said the Musketeer. "Oh dear me," said Porthos, "I feel so wearied, I would far sooner have been fast asleep. But the service of the king." "Have you seen him, Fouquet?" said Aramis to D'Artagnan. "Yes, this very minute in a carriage." "What did he say to you?" "Adieu, nothing more." "Was that all? What else do you think he could say? Am I worth anything now, since you have got into such high favor?" "Listen," said Aramis, embracing the Musketeer, "your good times are returning again. You will have no occasion to be jealous of anyone." "Bah, bah. I predict that something will happen to you today which will increase your importance more than ever." "Really? You know that I know all the news?" "Oh yes." "Come, Porthos, are you ready? Let us go." "I am quite ready, Aramis." "Let us embrace D'Artagnan first." "Most certainly. But the horses?" "Oh, there is no one of them here." "Will you have mine?" "No, Porthos has his own stud. So adieu." "Adieu." The fugitives mounted their horses beneath the very eyes of the captain of the Musketeers, who held Porthos's stirrup for him, and gazed after them until they were out of sight. On any other occasion, thought the Gascon, I should say that those gentlemen were making their escape, but in these days politics seems so changed that such an exit is termed going on a mission. I have no objection, let me attend to my own affairs, that is more than enough for me, and he philosophically entered his apartments. Chapter 22. Showing how the countersign was respected at the Bastille. Fouquet tore along as fast as his horses could drag him. On his way he trembled with horror at the idea of what had just been revealed to him. What must have been, he thought, the youth of those extraordinary men, who even as age is stealing fast upon them, are still able to conceive such gigantic plans, and carry them through without a tremor? At one moment he could not resist the idea that all Aramis had just been recounting to him was nothing more than a dream, and whether the fable itself was not the snare, so that when Fouquet arrived at the Bastille, he might possibly find an order of arrest, which would send him to join the dethroned king. Strongly impressed with this idea, he gave certain sealed orders on his route, while fresh horses were being harnessed to his carriage. These orders were addressed to M. d'Artagnan and to certain others whose fidelity to the king was far above suspicion. In this way, said Fouquet to himself, prisoner or not, I shall have performed the duty that I owe my honor. The orders will not reach them until after my return, if I should return free, and consequently they will not have been unsealed. I shall take them back again. If I am delayed, it will be because some misfortune will have befallen me, and in that case assistance will be sent for me as well as for the king. Prepared in this manner, the superintendent arrived at the Bastille. He had traveled at the rate of 5 leagues and a half the hour. Every circumstance of delay which Aramis had escaped in his visit to the Bastille befell Fouquet. It was useless giving his name, equally useless his being recognized. He could not succeed in obtaining an entrance. By dint of entreaties, threats, commands, he succeeded in inducing a sentinel to speak to one of the subalterns, who went and told the major. As for the governor, they did not even dare disturb him. Fouquet sat in his carriage at the outer gate of the fortress, chafing with rage and impatience, awaiting the return of the officers, who at last reappeared with a sufficiently sulky air. "Well," said Fouquet impatiently, "what did the major say?" "Well, monsieur," replied the soldier, "the major laughed in my face. He told me that M. Fouquet was at Vaux, and that even were he at Paris, M. Fouquet would not get up at so early an hour as the present." "Mordieu! You are an absolute set of fools," cried the minister, darting out of the carriage, and before the subaltern had time to shut the gate, Fouquet sprang through it, and ran forward in spite of the soldier, who cried out for assistance. Fouquet gained ground regardless of the cries of the man, who, however, having at last come up with Fouquet, called out to the sentinel of the second gate, look out, sentinel." The man crossed his pike before the minister, but the latter, robust and active and hurried away too by his passion, wrested the pike from the soldier and struck him a violent blow on the shoulder with it. The subaltern, who approached too closely, received a share of the blows as well. Both of them uttered loud and furious cries, at the sound of which the whole of the first body of the advanced guard poured out of the guardhouse. Among them there was one, however, who recognized the superintendent, and who called, "Monseigneur, ah, Monseigneur! Stop, you fellows!" And he effectually checked the soldiers, who were on the point of revenging their companions. Fouquet desired them to open the gate, but they refused to do so without the countersign. He desired them to inform the governor of his presence, but the latter had already heard the disturbance at the gate. He ran forward, followed by his major, and accompanied by a picket of 20 men, persuaded that an attack was being made on the Bastille. Baisemeaux also recognized Fouquet immediately, and dropped the sword he bravely had been brandishing. "Ah, Monseigneur," he stammered, "how can I excuse?" "Monsieur," said the superintendent, flushed with anger and heated by his exertions, "I congratulate you. Your watch and ward are admirably kept." Baisemeaux turned pale, thinking that this remark was made ironically, and portended a furious burst of anger. But Fouquet had recovered his breath, and beckoning the sentinel and the subaltern, who were rubbing their shoulders towards him, he said, "There are 20 pistoles for the sentinel and 50 for the officer. Pray receive my compliments, gentlemen. I will not fail to speak to His Majesty about you. And now, M. Baisemeaux, a word with you." And he followed the governor to his official residence, accompanied by a murmur of general satisfaction. Baisemeaux was already trembling with shame and uneasiness. Aramis's early visit from that moment seemed to possess consequences, which a functionary such as he, Baisemeaux, was perfectly justified in apprehending. It was quite another thing, however, when Fouquet, in a sharp tone of voice and with an imperious look, said, "You have seen M. de Herblay this morning?" "Yes, Monseigneur." "And are you not horrified at the crime of which you have made yourself an accomplice?" "Well," thought Baisemeaux, "good so far," and then he added aloud, "But what crime, Monseigneur, do you allude to?" "That for which you can be quartered alive, monsieur. Do not forget that. But this is not a time to show anger. Conduct me immediately to the prisoner." "To what prisoner?" said Baisemeaux, trembling. "You pretend to be ignorant? Very good, it is the best plan for you, perhaps. For if, in fact, you were to admit your participation in such a crime, it would be all over with you. I wish, therefore, to seem to believe in your assumption of ignorance. I entreat you, Monseigneur." "That will do. Lead me to the prisoner." "To Marchiali?" "Who is Marchiali?" "The prisoner who was brought back this morning by M. de Herblay." "He is called Marchiali?" said the superintendent, his conviction somewhat shaken by Basmos's cool manner. Yes, Monseigneur, that is the name under which he was inscribed here. Fouquet looked steadily at Basmos as if he would read his very heart, and perceived, with that clear-sightedness most men possess who are accustomed to the exercise of power, that the man was speaking with perfect sincerity. Besides, in observing his face for a few moments, he could not believe that Aramis would have chosen such a confidant. "It is the prisoner," said the superintendent to him, "whom M. de Herblay carried away the day before yesterday?" "Yes, Monseigneur." "And whom he brought back this morning?" added Fouquet quickly, for he understood immediately the mechanism of Aramis's plan. "Precisely, Monseigneur." "And his name is Marchiali, you say?" "Yes, Marchiali." "If Monseigneur has come here to remove him, so much the better, for I was going to write about him." "What has he done, then?" "Ever since this morning he has annoyed me extremely. He has had such terrible fits of passion, as almost to make me believe that he would bring the Bastille itself down about our ears." "I will soon relieve you of his possession," said Fouquet. "Ah, so much the better. Conduct me to his prison." "Will Monseigneur give me the order?" "What order?" "An order from the king." "Wait until I sign you one." "That will not be sufficient, Monseigneur. I must have an order from the king." Fouquet assumed an irritated expression. "As you are so scrupulous," he said, "with regard to allowing prisoners to leave, show me the order by which this one was set at liberty." Basmos showed him the order to release Selden. "Very good," said Fouquet, "but Selden is not Marchiali." "But Marchiali is not at liberty, Monseigneur. He is here." "But you said that M. de Herblay carried him away and brought him back again." "I did not say so." "So surely did you say it, that I almost seem to hear it now." "It was a slip of my tongue, then, Monseigneur." "Take care, M. Basmos, take care." "I have nothing to fear, Monseigneur. I am acting according to the very strictest regulation." "Do you dare to say so?" "I would say so in the presence of one of the apostles. M. de Herblay brought me an order to set Selden at liberty. Selden is free. I tell you that Marchiali has left the Bastille." "You must prove that, Monseigneur." "Let me see him." "You, Monseigneur, who govern this kingdom, know very well that no one can see any of the prisoners without an express order from the king. M. de Herblay has entered, however." "That remains to be proved, Monseigneur." "M. de Basmos, once more I warn you to pay particular attention to what you are saying. All the documents are there, Monseigneur." "M. de Herblay is overthrown." "Overthrown? M. de Herblay? Impossible." "You see that he has undoubtedly influenced you." "No, Monseigneur, what does in fact influence me is the king's service. I am doing my duty. Give me an order from him and you shall enter." "Stay, le Gouverneur, I give you my word that if you allow me to see the prisoner, I will give you an order from the king at once." "Give it to me now, Monseigneur." "And that, if you refuse me, I will have you and all your officers arrested on the spot." "Before you commit such an act of violence, Monseigneur, you will reflect," said Basmos, who had turned very pale, "that we will only obey an order signed by the king, and that it will be just as easy for you to obtain one to see Marchiali as to obtain one to do me so much injury, me too, who am perfectly innocent." "True." "True," cried Fouquet furiously, "perfectly true. De Basmos," he added in a sonorous voice, drawing the unhappy governor towards him, "do you know why I am so anxious to speak to the prisoner?" "No, Monseigneur, and allow me to observe that you are terrifying me out of my senses. I am trembling all over. In fact, I feel as though I were about to faint." "You will stand a better chance of fainting outright, Monsieur Basmos, when I return here at the head of 10,000 men and 30 pieces of cannon. Good heavens, Monseigneur, you are losing your senses. When I have roused the whole population of Paris against you and your accursed towers, and have battered open the gates of this place, and hanged you to the topmost tree of yonder pinnacle." "Monseigneur, Monseigneur, for pity's sake." "I give you 10 minutes to make up your mind," added Fouquet in a calm voice. "I will sit down here in this armchair and wait for you. If in 10 minutes' time you still persist, I leave this place and you may think me as mad as you like. Then, you shall see." Basmos stamped his foot on the ground like a man in a state of despair, but he did not reply a single syllable, whereupon Fouquet seized a pen and ink and wrote, "Order for M. le Prévôt de Marchands to assemble the municipal guard and to march upon the Bastille on the king's immediate service." Basmos shrugged his shoulders. Fouquet wrote, "Order for the Duc de Bouillon and M. le Prince de Condé to assume the command of the Swiss guards, of the king's guards, and to march upon the Bastille on the king's immediate service." Basmos reflected. Fouquet still wrote. Order for every soldier, citizen, or gentleman to seize and apprehend, wherever he may be found, le Chevalier de Herblay Yves de Vennes, and his accomplices, who are, first M. de Baismos, governor of the Bastille, suspected of the crimes of high treason and rebellion. Stop, monseigneur, cried Baismos. I do not understand a single jot of the whole matter, but so many misfortunes, even were it madness itself that had set them at their awful work, might happen here in a couple of hours, that the king, by whom I must be judged, will see whether I have been wrong in withdrawing the countersign before this flood of imminent catastrophes. Come with me to the keep, monseigneur, you shall see Marchiali. Fouquet darted out of the room, followed by Baismos as he wiped the perspiration from his face. What a terrible morning, he said, what a disgrace for me. Walk faster, replied Fouquet. Baismos made a sign to the jailer to precede them. He was afraid of his companion, which the latter could not fail to perceive. A truce to this child's play, he said roughly. Let the man remain here, take the keys yourself and show me the way. Not a single person, do you understand, must hear what is going to take place here. Ah, said Baismos, undecided. Again, cried M. Fouquet. Ah, say no at once, and I will leave the Bastille and will myself carry my own dispatches. Baismos bowed his head, took the keys, and unaccompanied, except by the minister, ascended the staircase. The higher they advanced up the spiral staircase, the more clearly did certain muffled murmurs become distinct appeals and fearful imprecations. What is that? Asked Fouquet. That is your Marchiali, said the governor. This is the way these madmen scream. And he accompanied that reply with a glance more pregnant with injurious allusion, as far as Fouquet was concerned, than politeness. The latter trembled. He had just recognized in one cry more terrible than any that had preceded it, the king's voice. He paused on the staircase, snatching the bunch of keys from Baismos, who thought this new madman was going to dash out his brains with one of them. Ah, he cried, and de Herblay did not say a word about that. Give me the keys at once, cried Fouquet, tearing them from his hand. Which is the key of the door I am to open? That one. A fearful cry, followed by a violent blow against the door, made the whole staircase resound with the echo. Leave this place, said Fouquet to Baismos in a threatening tone. I ask nothing better, murmured the latter to himself. There will be a couple of madmen face to face, and the one will kill the other, I am sure. Go, repeated Fouquet. If you place your foot on this staircase before I call you, remember that you shall take the place of the meanest prisoner in the Bastille. This job will kill me, I am sure it will, muttered Baismos as he withdrew with tottering steps. The prisoner's cries became more and more terrible. When Fouquet had satisfied himself that Baismos had reached the bottom of the staircase, he inserted the key in the first lock. It was then that he heard the hoarse, choking voice of the king crying out in a frenzy of rage, "Help, help! I am the king." The key of the second door was not the same as the first, and Fouquet was obliged to look for it on the bunch. The king, however, furious and almost mad with rage and passion, shouted at the top of his voice, "It was M. Fouquet who brought me here. Help me against M. Fouquet. I am the king. Help the king against M. Fouquet." These cries filled the minister's heart with terrible emotions. They were followed by a shower of blows leveled against the door with a part of the broken chair with which the king had armed himself. Fouquet at last succeeded in finding the key. The king was almost exhausted. He could hardly articulate distinctly as he shouted, "Death to Fouquet! Death to the traitor Fouquet!" The door flew open. Chapter 23. The King's Gratitude. The two men were on the point of darting towards each other when they suddenly and abruptly stopped, as a mutual recognition took place, and each uttered a cry of horror. "Have you come to assassinate me, monsieur?" said the king when he recognized Fouquet. "The king in this state," murmured the minister. Nothing could be more terrible indeed than the appearance of the young prince at the moment Fouquet had surprised him. His clothes were in tatters. His shirt, open and torn to rags, was stained with sweat and with the blood which streamed from his lacerated breast and arms. Haggard, ghastly pale, his hair in disheveled masses, Louis XIV. presented the most perfect picture of despair, distress, anger and fear combined that could possibly be united in one figure. Fouquet was so touched, so affected and disturbed by it, that he ran towards him with his arms stretched out and his eyes filled with tears. Louis held up the massive piece of wood of which he had made such a furious use. "Sire," said Fouquet in a voice trembling with emotion, "do you not recognize the most faithful of your friends?" "A friend, you," repeated Louis, gnashing his teeth in a manner which betrayed his hate and desire for speedy vengeance. The most respectful of your servants, added Fouquet, throwing himself on his knees. The king let the rude weapon fall from his grasp. Fouquet approached him, kissed his knees, and took him in his arms with inconceivable tenderness. "My king, my child," he said, "how you must have suffered." Louis, recalled to himself by the change of situation, looked at himself, and ashamed of the disordered state of his apparel, ashamed of his conduct, and ashamed of the air of pity and protection that was shown towards him, drew back. Fouquet did not understand this movement. He did not perceive that the king's feeling of pride would never forgive him for having been a witness of such an exhibition of weakness. "Come, sire," he said, "you are free." "Free?" repeated the king. "Oh, you set me at liberty, then, after having dared to lift up your hand against me." "You do not believe that," exclaimed Fouquet indignantly. "You cannot believe me to be guilty of such an act." And rapidly, warmly even, he related the whole particulars of the intrigue, the details of which are already known to the reader. While the recital continued, Louis suffered the most horrible anguish of mind, and when it was finished, the magnitude of the danger he had run struck him far more than the importance of the secret relative to his twin brother. "Monsieur," he said suddenly to Fouquet, "this double birth is a falsehood. It is impossible, you cannot have been the dupe of it." "Sire, it is impossible, I tell you, that the honor, the virtue of my mother can be suspected, and my first minister has not yet done justice on the criminals." "Reflect, sire, before you are hurried away by anger," replied Fouquet. "The birth of your brother—" "I have only one brother, and that is Monsieur. You know it as well as myself. There is a plot, I tell you, beginning with the governor of the Bastille. Be careful, sire, for this man has been deceived as everyone else has by the prince's likeness to yourself." "Likeness? Absurd. This Marchiali must be singularly like your majesty, to be able to deceive everyone's eye," Fouquet persisted. "Ridiculous." "Do not say so, sire. Those who had prepared everything in order to face and deceive your ministers, your mother, your officers of state, the members of your family, must be quite confident of the resemblance between you." "But where are these persons then?" murmured the king. "At Vaux." "At Vaux. And you suffer them to remain there." "My most instant duty appeared to me to be your majesty's release. I have accomplished that duty, and now whatever your majesty may command shall be done. I await your orders." Louis reflected for a few moments. "Muster all the troops in Paris," he said. "All the necessary orders are given for that purpose," replied Fouquet. "You have given orders?" exclaimed the king. "For that purpose, yes, sire. Your majesty will be at the head of 10,000 men in less than an hour." The only reply the king made was to take hold of Fouquet's hand with such an expression of feeling, that it was very easy to perceive how strongly he had, until that remark, maintained his suspicions of the minister, notwithstanding the latter's intervention. "And with these troops," he said, "we shall go at once and besiege in your house the rebels who by this time will have established and entrenched themselves therein." "I should be surprised if that were the case," replied Fouquet. "Why?" "Because their chief, the very soul of the enterprise, having been unmasked by me, the whole plan seems to me to have miscarried." "You have unmasked this false prince also?" "No, I have not seen him." "Whom have you seen then?" "The leader of the enterprise, not that unhappy young man. The latter is merely an instrument, destined through his whole life to wretchedness, I plainly perceive." "Most certainly. It is l'Abbé de Herblay Yves de Vennes." "Your friend?" "He was my friend, sire," replied Fouquet nobly. "An unfortunate circumstance for you," said the king in a less generous tone of voice. "Such friendships, sire, had nothing dishonorable in them so long as I was ignorant of the crime. You should have foreseen it. If I am guilty, I place myself in your majesty's hands." "Ah, Monsieur Fouquet, it was not that I meant," returned the king, sorry to have shown the bitterness of his thought in such a manner. "Well, I assure you that, notwithstanding the mask with which the villain covered his face, I had something like a vague suspicion that he was the very man. But with this chief of the enterprise there was a man of prodigious strength, the one who menaced me with a force almost Herculean. What is he?" "It must be his friend the Baron du Vallon, formerly one of the Musketeers." "The friend of D'Artagnan? The friend of the Comte de la Fère?" "Ah!" exclaimed the king as he paused at the name of the latter, "we must not forget the connection that existed between the conspirators and M. de Bragelonne." "Sire, sire, do not go too far. De la Fère is the most honorable man in France. Be satisfied with those whom I deliver up to you." "With those whom you deliver up to me, you say? Very good, for you will deliver up those who are guilty to me." What does your majesty understand by that? Inquired Fouquet. I understand, replied the king, that we shall soon arrive at Vaux with a large body of troops, that we will lay violent hands upon that nest of vipers, and that not a soul shall escape. Your majesty will put these men to death, cried Fouquet. To the very meanest of them. Oh, sire. Let us understand one another, Monsieur Fouquet, said the king haughtily. We no longer live in times when assassination was the only and the last resource kings held in reservation at extremity. No, heaven be praised. I have parliaments who sit and judge in my name, and I have scaffolds on which supreme authority is carried out. Fouquet turned pale. I will take the liberty of observing to your majesty, that any proceedings instituted respecting these matters would bring down the greatest scandal upon the dignity of the throne. The august name of Anne of Austria must never be allowed to pass the lips of the people accompanied by a smile. Justice must be done, however, monsieur. Good sire, but royal blood must not be shed upon a scaffold. The royal blood. You believe that, cried the king with fury in his voice, stamping his foot on the ground. This double birth is an invention, and in that invention particularly, do I see M. d'Herblay's crime. It is the crime I wish to punish rather than the violence or the insult. And punish it with death, sire? With death, yes, monsieur, I have said it. Sire, said the surintendant with firmness as he raised his head proudly, your majesty will take the life, if you please, of your brother Philippe of France. That concerns you alone, and you will doubtless consult the Queen Mother upon the subject. Whatever she may command will be perfectly correct. I do not wish to mix myself up in it, not even for the honor of your crown, but I have a favor to ask of you, and I beg to submit it to you. Speak, said the king, in no little degree agitated by his minister's last words. What do you require? The pardon of M. d'Herblay and of M. du Vallon. My assassins? 2 rebels, sire, that is all. Oh, I understand, then you ask me to forgive your friends. My friends? Said Fouquet, deeply wounded. Your friends, certainly, but the safety of the state requires that an exemplary punishment should be inflicted on the guilty. I will not permit myself to remind your majesty that I have just restored you to liberty, and have saved your life. Monsieur. I will not allow myself to remind your majesty that had M. d'Herblay wished to carry out his character of an assassin, he could very easily have assassinated your majesty this morning in the forest of Senart, and all would have been over. The king started. A pistol bullet through the head, pursued Fouquet, and the disfigured features of Louis XIV, which no one could have recognized, would be M. d'Herblay's complete and entire justification. The king turned pale and giddy at the bare idea of the danger he had escaped. If M. d'Herblay, continued Fouquet, had been an assassin, he had no occasion to inform me of his plan in order to succeed. Freed from the real king, it would have been impossible in all futurity to guess the false. And if the usurper had been recognized by Anne of Austria, he would still have been her son. The usurper, as far as Monsieur d'Herblay's conscience was concerned, was still a king of the blood of Louis XIII. Moreover, the conspirator in that course would have had security, secrecy, impunity. A pistol bullet would have procured him all that. For the sake of heaven, sire, grant me his forgiveness. The king, instead of being touched by the picture, so faithfully drawn in all details, of Aramis's generosity, felt himself most painfully and cruelly humiliated. His unconquerable pride revolted at the idea that a man had held suspended at the end of his finger the thread of his royal life. Every word that fell from Fouquet's lips, and which he thought most efficacious in procuring his friend's pardon, seemed to pour another drop of poison into the already ulcerated heart of Louis XIV. Nothing could bend or soften him. Addressing himself to Fouquet, he said, I really don't know, monsieur, why you should solicit the pardon of these men. What good is there in asking that which can be obtained without solicitation? I do not understand you, sire. It is not difficult either. Where am I now? In the Bastille, sire. Yes, in a dungeon. I am looked upon as a madman, am I not? Yes, sire. And no one is known here but Marchiali? Certainly. Well, change nothing in the position of affairs. Let the poor madman rot between the slimy walls of the Bastille, and M. d'Herblay and M. du Vallon will stand in no need of my forgiveness. Their new king will absolve them. Your majesty does me a great injustice, sire, and you are wrong, replied Fouquet dryly. I am not child enough, nor is M. d'Herblay silly enough, to have omitted to make all these reflections, and if I had wished to make a new king as you say, I had no occasion to have come here to force open the gates and doors of the Bastille, to free you from this place. That would show a want of even common sense. Your majesty's mind is disturbed by anger. Otherwise you would be far from offending groundlessly the very one of your servants who has rendered you the most important service of all." Louis perceived that he had gone too far, that the gates of the Bastille were still closed upon him, whilst, by degrees, the floodgates were gradually being opened, behind which the generous-hearted Fouquet had restrained his anger. "I did not say that to humiliate you, heaven knows, monsieur," he replied. "Only you are addressing yourself to me in order to obtain a pardon, and I answer according to my conscience. And so, judging by my conscience, the criminals we speak of are not worthy of consideration or forgiveness." Fouquet was silent. "What I do is as generous," added the king, "as what you have done, for I am in your power. I will even say it is more generous, inasmuch as you place before me certain conditions upon which my liberty, my life, may depend, and to reject which is to make a sacrifice of both." "I was wrong, certainly," replied Fouquet. "Yes, I had the appearance of extorting a favor. I regret it and entreat your majesty's forgiveness." "And you are forgiven, my dear Monsieur Fouquet," said the king with a smile, which restored the serene expression of his features, which so many circumstances had altered since the preceding evening. "I have my own forgiveness," replied the minister with some degree of persistence. "But M. de Herblay and M. du Vallon? They will never obtain theirs as long as I live," replied the inflexible king. "Do me the kindness not to speak of it again. Your majesty shall be obeyed. And you will bear me no ill will for it?" "Oh, no, sire, for I anticipated the event." "You had anticipated that I should refuse to forgive those gentlemen?" "Certainly, and all my measures were taken in consequence." "What do you mean to say?" cried the king, surprised. "M. de Herblay came, as may be said, to deliver himself into my hands. M. de Herblay left to me the happiness of saving my king and my country. I could not condemn M. de Herblay to death, nor could I, on the other hand, expose him to your majesty's justifiable wrath. It would have been just the same as if I had killed him myself." "Well, and what have you done?" "Sire, I gave M. de Herblay the best horses in my stables and 4 hours' start over all those your majesty might probably dispatch after him." "Be it so," murmured the king. "But still, the world is wide enough and large enough for those whom I may send to overtake your horses, notwithstanding the 4 hours' start, which you have given to M. de Herblay. In giving him these 4 hours, sire, I knew I was giving him his life, and he will save his life." "In what way?" "After having galloped as hard as possible with the 4 hours' start before your musketeers, he will reach my chateau of Belle Isle, where I have given him a safe asylum." "That may be. But you forget that you have made me a present of Belle Isle." "But not for you to arrest my friends." "You take it back again, then?" "As far as that goes, yes, sire. My musketeers shall capture it, and the affair will be at an end." "Neither your musketeers, nor your whole army could take Belle Isle," said Fouquet coldly. "Belle Isle is impregnable." The king became perfectly livid. A lightning flash seemed to dart from his eyes. Fouquet felt that he was lost, but he is not one to shrink when the voice of honor spoke loudly within him. He bore the king's wrathful gaze. The latter swallowed his rage and after a few moments' silence said, "Are we going to return to Vaux?" "I am at your majesty's orders," replied Fouquet with a low bow, "but I think that your majesty can hardly dispense with changing your clothes previous to appearing before your court." "We shall pass by the Louvre," said the king. "Come." And they left the prison, passing before Baisemeaux, who looked completely bewildered as he saw Marchiali once more leave, and in his helplessness, tore out the major portion of his few remaining hairs. It was perfectly true, however, that Fouquet wrote and gave him an authority for the prisoner's release, and that the king wrote beneath it, "Seen and approved Louis," a piece of madness that Baisemeaux, incapable of putting two ideas together, acknowledged by giving himself a terrible blow on the forehead with his own fist. Chapter 24. The False King. In the meantime, usurped royalty was playing out its part bravely at Vaux. Philippe gave orders that for his petit lever the grandes entrées, already prepared to appear before the king, should be introduced. He determined to give this order notwithstanding the absence of M. de Herblay, who did not return. Our readers know the reason. But the prince, not believing that absence could be prolonged, wished, as all rash spirits do, to try his valor and his fortune far from all protection and instruction. Another reason urged him to this, and of Austria was about to appear. The guilty mother was about to stand in the presence of her sacrificed son. Philippe was not willing, if he had a weakness, to render the man a witness of it before whom he was bound thenceforth to display so much strength. Philippe opened his folding doors and several persons entered silently. Philippe did not stir whilst his valets de chambre dressed him. He had watched, the evening before, all the habits of his brother, and played the king in such a manner as to awaken no suspicion. He was thus completely dressed in hunting costume when he received his visitors. His own memory and the notes of Aramis announced everybody to him, first of all Anne of Austria, to whom Monsieur gave his hand, and then Madame with M. de Saint-Aignan. He smiled at seeing these countenances, but trembled on recognizing his mother. That still so noble and imposing figure, ravaged by pain, pleaded in his heart the cause of the famous queen who had immolated a child to reasons of state. He found his mother still handsome. He knew that Louis XIV loved her, and he promised himself to love her likewise, and not to prove a scourge to her old age. He contemplated his brother with a tenderness easily to be understood. The latter had usurped nothing, had cast no shades athwart his life. A separate tree, he allowed the stem to rise without heeding its elevation or majestic life. Philippe promised himself to be a kind brother to this prince, who required nothing but gold to minister to his pleasures. He bowed with a friendly air to Saint-Aignan, who was all reverences and smiles, and trembling held out his hand to Henrietta, his sister-in-law, whose beauty struck him. But he saw in the eyes of that princess an expression of coldness which would facilitate, as he thought, their future relations. How much more easy, thought he, it will be to be the brother of that woman than her gallant, if she evinces towards me a coldness that my brother could not have for her, but which is imposed upon me as a duty. The only visit he dreaded at this moment was that of the queen. His heart, his mind, had just been shaken by so violent a trial, that, in spite of their firm temperament, they would not, perhaps, support another shock. Happily the queen did not come. Then commenced, on the part of Anne of Austria, a political dissertation upon the welcome M. Fouquet had given to the House of France. She mixed up hostilities with compliments addressed to the king, and questions as to his health, with little maternal flatteries and diplomatic artifices. "Well, my son," said she, "are you convinced with regard to M. Fouquet?" "Saint-Aignan," said Philippe, "have the goodness to go and inquire after the queen." At these words, the first Philippe had pronounced aloud, the slight difference that there was between his voice and that of the king was sensible to maternal ears, and Anne of Austria looked earnestly at her son. Saint-Aignan left the room, and Philippe continued, "Madame, I do not like to hear M. Fouquet ill spoken of, you know I do not, and you have even spoken well of him yourself. That is true, therefore I only question you on the state of your sentiments with respect to him." "Sire," said Henrietta, "I, on my part, have always liked M. Fouquet. He is a man of good taste, a superior man. A superintendent who is never sordid or niggardly," added Monsieur, "and who pays in gold all the orders I have on him." "Everyone in this thinks too much of himself and nobody for the state," said the old queen. "M. Fouquet, it is a fact, M. Fouquet is ruining the state." "Well, mother," replied Philippe in rather a lower key, "do you likewise constitute yourself the buckler of M. Colbert?" "How is that?" replied the old queen, rather surprised. "Why, in truth," replied Philippe, "you speak that just as your old friend Madame de Chevreuse would speak." "Why do you mention Madame de Chevreuse to me?" said she, "and what sort of humor are you in today towards me?" Philippe continued, "Is not Madame de Chevreuse always in league against somebody? Has not Madame de Chevreuse been to pay you a visit, mother? Monsieur, you speak to me now in such a manner that I can almost fancy I am listening to your father. My father did not like Madame de Chevreuse, and had good reason for not liking her," said the prince. "For my part, I like her no better than he did, and if she thinks proper to come here as she formerly did, to sow divisions and hatreds under the pretext of begging money, why, well, what?" said Anne of Austria proudly, herself provoking the storm. "Well," replied the young man firmly, "I will drive Madame de Chevreuse out of my kingdom, and with her all who meddle with its secrets and mysteries." He had not calculated the effect of this terrible speech, or perhaps he wished to judge the effect of it, like those who, suffering from a chronic pain, and seeking to break the monotony of that suffering, touch their wound to procure a sharper pang. Anne of Austria was nearly fainting. Her eyes, open but meaningless, ceased to see for several seconds. She stretched out her arms towards her other son, who supported and embraced her without fear of irritating the king. "Sire," murmured she, "you are treating your mother very cruelly." "In what respect, madame?" replied he. "I am only speaking of Madame de Chevreuse. Does my mother prefer Madame de Chevreuse to the security of the state and of my person? Well then, madame, I tell you Madame de Chevreuse has returned to France to borrow money, and that she addressed herself to M. Fouquet to sell him a certain secret." "A certain secret," cried Anne of Austria. Concerning pretended robberies that Monsieur le Surintendant had committed, which is false, added Philippe. M. Fouquet rejected her offers with indignation, preferring the esteem of the king to complicity with such intriguers. Then Madame de Chevreuse sold the secret to M. Colbert, and as she is insatiable, and was not satisfied with having extorted 100,000 crowns from a servant of the state, she has taken a still bolder flight, in search of surer sources of supply. Is that true, madam? You know all, sire, said the queen, more uneasy than irritated. Now, continued Philippe, I have good reason to dislike this fury, who comes to my court to plan the shame of some and the ruin of others. If heaven has suffered certain crimes to be committed, and has concealed them in the shadow of its clemency, I will not permit Madame de Chevreuse to counteract the just designs of fate. The latter part of this speech had so agitated the queen mother, that her son had pity on her. He took her hand and kissed it tenderly. She did not feel that in that kiss, given in spite of repulsion and bitterness of the heart, there was a pardon for 8 years of suffering. Philippe allowed the silence of a moment to swallow the emotions that had just developed themselves. Then, with a cheerful smile, "We will not go today," said he, "I have a plan." And turning towards the door, he hoped to see Aramis, whose absence began to alarm him. The queen mother wished to leave the room. "Remain where you are, mother," said he. "I wish you to make your peace with M. Fouquet." "I bear M. Fouquet no ill will, I only dreaded his prodigalities. We will put that to rights, and will take nothing of the superintendent but his good qualities." "What is your majesty looking for?" said Henrietta, seeing the king's eyes constantly turned towards the door, and wishing to let fly a little poisoned arrow at his heart, supposing he was so anxiously expecting either La Valliere or a letter from her. "My sister," said the young man, who had divined her thought, thanks to that marvelous perspicuity of which fortune was from that time about to allow him the exercise, "my sister, I am expecting a most distinguished man, a most able counselor, whom I wish to present to you all, recommending him to your good graces." "Come in then, D'Artagnan." "What does your majesty wish?" said D'Artagnan, appearing. "Where is Monsieur the Bishop of Vannes, your friend?" "Why, sire, I am waiting for him and he does not come." "Let him be sought for." D'Artagnan remained for an instant stupefied, but soon, reflecting that Aramis had left Vaux privately on a mission from the king, he concluded that the king wished to preserve the secret. "Sire," replied he, "does your majesty absolutely require M. d'Herblay to be brought to you?" "Absolutely is not the word," said Philippe. "I do not want him so particularly as that, but if he can be found." "I thought so," said D'Artagnan to himself. "Is this M. d'Herblay the Bishop of Vannes?" "Yes, madame." "A friend of M. Fouquet?" "Yes, madame, an old Musketeer." Anne of Austria blushed. One of the 4 braves who formerly performed such prodigies. The old queen repented of having wished to bite. She broke off the conversation, in order to preserve the rest of her teeth. "Whatever may be your choice, sire," said she, "I have no doubt it will be excellent." All bowed in support of that sentiment. "You will find in him," continued Philippe, "the depth and penetration of M. de Richelieu, without the avarice of M. de Mazarin." "A prime minister, sire?" said Monsieur in a fright. "I will tell you all about that, brother, but it is strange that M. d'Herblay is not here." He called out, "Let M. Fouquet be informed that I wish to speak to him. Oh, before you, do not retire." De Saint-Aignan returned, bringing satisfactory news of the queen, who only kept her bed from precaution, and to have strength to carry out the king's wishes. Whilst everybody was seeking M. Fouquet and Aramis, the new king quietly continued his experiments, and everybody, family, officers, servants, had not the least suspicion of his identity. His air, his voice, and manners were so like the king's. On his side, Philippe, applying to all countenances the accurate descriptions and keynotes of character supplied by his accomplice Aramis, conducted himself so as not to give birth to a doubt in the minds of those who surrounded him. Nothing from that time could disturb the usurper. With what strange facility had Providence just reversed the loftiest fortune of the world to substitute the lowliest in its stead. Philippe admired the goodness of God with regard to himself, and seconded it with all the resources of his admirable nature. But he felt, at times, something like a spectre gliding between him and the rays of his new glory. Aramis did not appear. The conversation had languished in the royal family. Philippe, preoccupied, forgot to dismiss his brother and Madame Henrietta. The latter were astonished and began by degrees to lose all patience. Anne of Austria stooped towards her son's ear and addressed some words to him in Spanish. Philippe was completely ignorant of that language and grew pale at this unexpected obstacle. But, as if the spirit of the imperturbable Aramis had covered him with his infallibility, instead of appearing disconcerted, Philippe rose. "Well, what?" said Anne of Austria. "What is all that noise?" said Philippe, turning round towards the door of the second staircase. And a voice was heard saying, "This way, this way. A few steps more, sire." "The voice of M. Fouquet," said D'Artagnan, who was standing close to the Queen Mother. "Then M. d'Herblay cannot be far off," added Philippe. But he then saw what he little thought to have beheld so near to him. All eyes were turned towards the door at which M. Fouquet was expected to enter, but it was not M. Fouquet who entered. A terrible cry resounded from all corners of the chamber, a painful cry uttered by the king and all present. It is given to but few men, even those whose destiny contains the strangest elements, and accidents the most wonderful, to contemplate such a spectacle similar to that which presented itself in the royal chamber at that moment. The half-closed shutters only admitted the entrance of an uncertain light passing through thick violet velvet curtains lined with silk. In this soft shade, the eyes were by degrees dilated, and every one present saw others rather with imagination than with actual sight. There could not, however, escape in these circumstances one of the surrounding details, and the new object which presented itself appeared as luminous as though it shone out in full sunlight. So it happened with Louis XIV. When he showed himself, pale and frowning, in the doorway of the secret stairs. The face of Fouquet appeared behind him, stamped with sorrow and determination. The Queen Mother, who perceived Louis XIV, and who held the hand of Philippe, uttered a cry of which we have spoken, as if she beheld a phantom. Monsieur was bewildered, and kept turning his head in astonishment from one to the other. Madame made a step forward, thinking she was looking at the form of her brother-in-law reflected in a mirror. And, in fact, the illusion was possible. The two princes, both pale as death, for we renounced the hope of being able to describe the fearful state of Philippe, trembling, clenching their hands convulsively, measured each other with looks and darted their glances, sharp as poniards, at each other. Silent, panting, bending forward, they appeared as if about to spring upon an enemy. The unheard-of resemblance of countenance, gesture, shape, height, even to the resemblance of costume produced by chance, for Louis XIV, had been to the Louvre and put on a violet-colored dress. The perfect analogy of the two princes completed the consternation of Anne of Austria. And yet she did not at once guess the truth. There are misfortunes in life so truly dreadful that no one will at first accept them. People rather believe in the supernatural and the impossible. Louis had not reckoned on these obstacles. He expected that he had only to appear to be acknowledged. A living son, he could not endure the suspicion of equality with anyone. He did not admit that every torch should not become darkness at the instant he shone out with his conquering ray. At the aspect of Philippe, then, he was perhaps more terrified than anyone round him, and his silence, his immobility were, this time, a concentration and a calm which precede the violent explosions of concentrated passion. But Fouquet, who shall paint his emotion and stupor in presence of this living portrait of his master? Fouquet thought Aramis was right, that this newly arrived was a king as pure in his race as the other, and that, for having repudiated all participation in this coup d'état, so skillfully got up by the general of the Jesuits, he must be a mad enthusiast, unworthy of ever dipping his hands in political grand strategy work. And then it was the blood of Louis XIII, which Fouquet was sacrificing to the blood of Louis XIII. It was to a selfish ambition he was sacrificing a noble ambition, to the right of keeping he sacrificed the right of having. The whole extent of his fault was revealed to him at simple sight of the pretender. All that passed in the mind of Fouquet was lost upon the persons present. He had 5 minutes to focus meditation on this point of conscience. 5 minutes, that is to say 5 ages, during which the two kings and their families scarcely found energy to breathe after so terrible a shock. D'Artagnan, leaning against the wall in front of Fouquet, with his hand to his brow, asked himself the cause of such a wonderful prodigy. He could not have said at once why he doubted, but he knew assuredly that he had reason to doubt, and that in this meeting of the two Louis XIV lay all the doubt and difficulty that during late days had rendered the conduct of Aramis so suspicious to the Musketeer. These ideas were, however, enveloped in a haze, a veil of mystery. The actors in this assembly seemed to swim in the vapors of a confused waking. Suddenly Louis XIV, more impatient and more accustomed to command, ran to one of the shutters, which he opened, tearing the curtains in his eagerness. A flood of living light entered the chamber and made Philippe draw back to the alcove. Louis seized upon this movement with eagerness, and addressing himself to the queen, "My mother," said he, "do you not acknowledge your son, since everyone here has forgotten his king?" Anne of Austria started, and raised her arms towards heaven, without being able to articulate a single word. "My mother," said Philippe with a calm voice, "do you not acknowledge your son?" And this time in his turn Louis drew back. As to Anne of Austria, struck suddenly in head and heart with fell remorse, she lost her equilibrium. No one aiding her, for all were petrified, she sank back in her fauteuil, breathing a weak, trembling sigh. Louis could not endure the spectacle and the affront. He bounded towards D'Artagnan, over whose brain a vertigo was stealing and who staggered as he caught at the door for support. "A moi, Musketeer," said he. "Look us in the face and say which is the paler, he or I." This cry roused D'Artagnan, and stirred in his heart the fibers of obedience. He shook his head, and without more hesitation he walked straight up to Philippe, on whose shoulder he laid his hand, saying, "Monsieur, you are my prisoner." Philippe did not raise his eyes towards heaven, nor stir from the spot, where he seemed nailed to the floor, his eye intently fixed upon the king his brother. He reproached him with a sublime silence for all misfortunes past, all tortures to come. Against this language of the soul the king felt he had no power. He cast down his eyes, dragging away precipitately his brother and sister, forgetting his mother, sitting motionless within 3 paces of the son whom she left a second time to be condemned to death. Philippe approached Anne of Austria and said to her, in a soft and nobly agitated voice, "If I were not your son I should curse you, my mother, for having rendered me so unhappy." D'Artagnan felt a shudder pass through the marrow of his bones. He bowed respectfully to the young prince and said as he bent, "Excuse me, monseigneur, I am but a soldier, and my oaths are his who has just left the chamber." "Thank you, D'Artagnan. What has become of M. d'Herblay?" "D'Herblay is in safety, monseigneur," said a voice behind them, "and no one, while I live and am free, shall cause a hair to fall from his head." "Monsieur Fouquet," said the prince, smiling sadly. "Pardon me, monseigneur," said Fouquet, kneeling, "but he who is just gone out from hence was my guest." "Here are," murmured Philippe with a sigh, "brave friends and good hearts. They make me regret the world. On D'Artagnan, I follow you." At the moment the captain of the Musketeers was about to leave the room with his prisoner, Colbert appeared, and after remitting an order from the king to D'Artagnan, retired. D'Artagnan read the paper, and then crushed it in his hand with rage. "What is it?" asked the prince. "Read, monseigneur," replied the Musketeer. Philippe read the following words, hastily traced by the hand of the king. D'Artagnan will conduct the prisoner to the Isle Sainte Marguerite. He will cover his face with an iron visor, which the prisoner shall never raise except at peril of his life." "That is just," said Philippe with resignation. "I am ready." "Aramis was right," said Fouquet in a low voice to the Musketeer. "This one is every whit as much a king as the other." "More so," replied D'Artagnan. "He wanted only you and me." Chapter 25. In which Porthos thinks he is pursuing a duchy. Aramis and Porthos, having profited by the time granted them by Fouquet, did honor to the French cavalry by their speed. Porthos did not clearly understand on what kind of mission he was forced to display so much velocity, but as he saw Aramis spurring on furiously, he, Porthos, spurred on in the same way. They had soon, in this manner, placed 12 leagues between them and Vaux. They were then obliged to change horses and organize a sort of post arrangement. It was during a relay that Porthos ventured to interrogate Aramis discreetly. "Hush," replied the latter, "know only that our fortune depends on our speed." As if Porthos had still been the Musketeer, without a sou or a mail of 1626, he pushed forward. That magic word fortune always means something in the human ear. It means enough for those who have nothing. It means too much for those who have enough. "I shall be made a duke," said Porthos aloud. He was speaking to himself. "That is possible," replied Aramis, smiling after his own fashion as Porthos's horse passed him. Aramis felt, notwithstanding, as though his brain were on fire. The activity of the body had not yet succeeded in subduing that of the mind. All there is of raging passion, mental toothache or mortal threat, raged, gnawed and grumbled in the thoughts of the unhappy prelate. His countenance exhibited visible traces of this rude combat. Free on the highway to abandon himself to every impression of the moment, Aramis did not fail to swear at every start of his horse, at every inequality in the road. Pale, at times inundated with boiling sweats, then again dry and icy, he flogged his horses till the blood streamed from their sides. Porthos, whose dominant fault was not sensibility, groaned at this. Thus traveled they on for 8 long hours and then arrived at Orleans. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Aramis, on observing this, judged that nothing showed pursuit to be a possibility. It would be without example that a troop capable of taking him and Porthos should be furnished with relays sufficient to perform 40 leagues in 8 hours. Thus, admitting pursuit which was not at all manifest, the fugitives were 5 hours in advance of their pursuers. Aramis thought that there might be no imprudence in taking a little rest, but that to continue would make the matter more certain. 20 leagues more, performed with the same rapidity, 20 more leagues devoured, and no one, not even D'Artagnan, could overtake the enemies of the king. Aramis felt obliged, therefore, to inflict upon Porthos the pain of mounting on horseback again. They rode on till 7 o'clock in the evening, and had only 1 post more between them and Blois. But here a diabolical accident alarmed Aramis greatly. There were no horses at the post. The prelate asked himself by what infernal machination his enemies had succeeded in depriving him of the means of going further. He who never recognized chance as a deity, who found a cause for every accident, preferred believing that the refusal of the postmaster at such an hour in such a country was the consequence of an order emanating from above, an order given with a view of stopping short the kingmaker in the midst of his flight. But at the moment he was about to fly into a passion, so as to procure either a horse or an explanation, he was struck with the recollection that the Comte de la Fere lived in the neighborhood. "I am not traveling," said he. "I do not want horses for a whole stage. Find me 2 horses to go and pay a visit to a nobleman of my acquaintance who resides near this place." "What nobleman?" asked the postmaster. "Le Comte de la Fere." "Oh," replied the postmaster, uncovering with respect, "a very worthy nobleman. But, whatever may be my desire to make myself agreeable to him, I cannot furnish you with horses, for all mine are engaged by le Duc de Beaufort." "Indeed," said Aramis, much disappointed. "Only," continued the postmaster, "if you will put up with a little carriage I have, I will harness an old blind horse who has still his legs left, and peradventure will draw you to the house of le Comte de la Fere." "It is worth a louis," said Aramis. "No, monsieur, such a ride is worth no more than a crown. That is what Grimaud, the Comte's intendant, always pays me when he makes use of that carriage, and I should not wish the Comte de la Fere to have to reproach me with having imposed on one of his friends." "As you please," said Aramis, "particularly as regards disobliging the Comte de la Fere, only I think I have a right to give you a louis for your idea." "Oh, doubtless," replied the postmaster with delight. And he himself harnessed the ancient horse to the creaking carriage. In the meantime Porthos was curious to behold. He imagined he had discovered a clue to the secret, and he felt pleased because a visit to Athos in the first place promised him much satisfaction, and, in the next, gave him the hope of finding at the same time a good bed and good supper. The master, having got the carriage ready, ordered one of his men to drive the strangers to La Fere. Porthos took his seat by the side of Aramis, whispering in his ear, "I understand." "Aha," said Aramis, "and what do you understand, my friend?" "We are going, on the part of the king, to make some great proposal to Athos." "Pooh," said Aramis. "You need tell me nothing about it," added the worthy Porthos, endeavoring to reseat himself so as to avoid the jolting. "You need tell me nothing, I shall guess." "Well, do, my friend, guess away." They arrived at Athos's dwelling about 9 o'clock in the evening, favored by a splendid moon. This cheerful light rejoiced Porthos beyond expression, but Aramis appeared annoyed by it in an equal degree. He could not help showing something of this to Porthos, who replied, I guess how it is. The mission is a secret one." These were his last words in the carriage. The driver interrupted him by saying, "Gentlemen, we have arrived." Porthos and his companion alighted before the gate of the little chateau, where we are about to meet again our old acquaintances Athos and Bragelonne, the latter of whom had disappeared since the discovery of the infidelity of La Valliere. If there be one saying truer than another, it is this: great griefs contain within themselves the germ of consolation. This painful wound inflicted upon Raoul had drawn him nearer to his father again, and God knows how sweet were the consolations which flowed from the eloquent mouth and generous heart of Athos. The wound was not cicatrized, but Athos, by dint of conversing with his son and mixing a little more of his life with that of the young man, had brought him to understand that this pang of a first infidelity is necessary to every human existence, and that no one has loved without encountering it. Raoul listened again and again but never understood. Nothing replaces in the deeply afflicted heart the remembrance and thought of the beloved object. Raoul then replied to the reasoning of his father. "Monsieur, all that you tell me is true. I believe that no one has suffered in the affections of the heart so much as you have, but you are a man too great by reason of intelligence, and too severely tried by adverse fortune not to allow for the weakness of the soldier who suffers for the first time. I am paying a tribute that will not be paid a second time. Permit me to plunge myself so deeply in my grief that I may forget myself in it, that I may drown even my reason in it. Raoul, listen, monsieur. Never shall I accustom myself to the idea that Louise, the chastest and most innocent of women, has been able to so basely deceive a man so honest and so true a lover as myself. Never can I persuade myself that I see that sweet and noble mask change into a hypocritical lascivious face. Louise lost. Louise infamous. Monseigneur, that idea is much more cruel to me than Raoul abandoned, Raoul unhappy. Athos then employed the heroic remedy. He defended Louise against Raoul, and justified her perfidy by her love. A woman who would have yielded to a king because he is a king, said he, would deserve to be styled infamous, but Louise loves Louis. Young both they have forgotten he his rank she her vows. Love absolves everything, Raoul. The two young people love each other with sincerity. And when he had dealt this severe poniard thrust, Athos, with a sigh, saw Raoul bound away beneath the rankling wound, and fly to the thickest recesses of the wood, or the solitude of his chamber, whence an hour after he would return pale, trembling, but subdued. Then coming up to Athos with a smile, he would kiss his hand, like the dog who, having been beaten, caresses a respected master to redeem his fault. Raoul redeemed nothing but his weakness, and only confessed his grief. Thus passed away the days that followed that scene in which Athos had so violently shaken the indomitable pride of the king. Never, when conversing with his son, did he make any allusion to that scene. Never did he give him the details of that vigorous lecture, which might perhaps have consoled the young man, by showing him his rival humbled. Athos did not wish that the offended lover should forget the respect due to his king. And when Bragelonne, ardent, angry, and melancholy, spoke with contempt of royal words, of the equivocal faith which certain madmen draw from promises that emanate from thrones, when passing over 2 centuries, with that rapidity of a bird that traverses a narrow strait to go from one continent to the other, Raoul ventured to predict the time in which kings would be esteemed as less than other men, Athos said to him, in his serene, persuasive voice, "You are right, Raoul, all that you say will happen. Kings will lose their privileges as stars which have survived their eons lose their splendor. But when that moment comes, Raoul, we shall be dead. And remember well what I say to you. In this world all men, women, and kings must live for the present. We can only live for the future for God." This was the manner in which Athos and Raoul were, as usual, conversing, and walking backwards and forwards in the long alley of limes in the park, when the bell which served to announce to the Count either the hour of dinner or the arrival of a visitor, was rung, and without attaching any importance to it, he turned towards the house with his son, and at the end of the alley they found themselves in the presence of Aramis and Porthos. Chapter 26. The Last Adieus. Raoul uttered a cry and affectionately embraced Porthos. Aramis and Athos embraced like old men, and this embrace itself being a question for Aramis, he immediately said, "My friend, we have not long to remain with you." "Ah," said the Count. "Only time to tell you of my good fortune," interrupted Porthos. "Ah," said Raoul. Athos looked silently at Aramis, whose somber air had already appeared to him very little in harmony with the good news Porthos hinted. "What is the good fortune that has happened to you? Let us hear it," said Raoul with a smile. "The king has made me a duke," said the worthy Porthos with an air of mystery in the ear of the young man, "a duke by brevet." But the asides of Porthos were always loud enough to be heard by everybody. His murmurs were in the diapason of ordinary roaring. Athos heard him, and uttered an exclamation which made Aramis start. The latter took Athos by the arm, and after having asked Porthos's permission to say a word to his friend in private, "My dear Athos," he began, "you see me overwhelmed with grief and trouble." "With grief and trouble, my dear friend?" cried the Count. "Oh, what?" "In 2 words. I have conspired against the king. That conspiracy has failed, and at this moment, I am doubtless pursued." "You are pursued? A conspiracy?" "My friend, what do you tell me?" "The saddest truth. I am entirely ruined." "Well, but Porthos, this title of duke, what does all that mean?" "That is the subject of my severest pain. That is the deepest of my wounds. I have, believing in infallible success, drawn Porthos into my conspiracy. He threw himself into it as you know he would do with all his strength without knowing what he was about, and now he is as much compromised as myself, as completely ruined as I am. Good God!" And Athos turned towards Porthos, who was smiling complacently. I must make you acquainted with the whole. Listen to me, continued Aramis, and he related the history as we know it. Athos, during the recital, several times felt the sweat break from his forehead. It was a great idea, said he, but a great error, for which I am punished, Athos. Therefore, I will not tell you my entire thought. Tell it nevertheless. It is a crime. A capital crime, I know it is. Lèse majesté. Porthos. Poor Porthos. What would you advise me to do? Success, as I have told you, was certain. Fouquet is an honest man. And I a fool for having so ill-judged him, said Aramis. Oh, the wisdom of man! All millstone that grinds the world, and which is one day stopped by a grain of sand which has fallen, no one knows how, between its wheels. Say by a diamond, Aramis. But the thing is done. How do you think of acting? I am taking away Porthos. The king will never believe that that worthy man has acted innocently. He never can believe that Porthos has thought he was serving the king, whilst acting as he has done. His head would pay my fault. It shall not, must not be so. You are taking him away whither? To Belle-Isle at first. That is an impregnable place of refuge. Then I have the sea and a vessel to pass over into England, where I have many relations. You? In England? Yes, or else in Spain, where I have still more. But, our excellent Porthos, you ruin him, for the king will confiscate all his property. All is provided for. I know how, when once in Spain, to reconcile myself with Louis XIV, and restore Porthos to favor. You have credit, seemingly, Aramis, said Athos with a discreet air. Much, and at the service of my friends. These words were accompanied by a warm pressure of the hand. Thank you, replied the Count. And while we are on this head, said Aramis, you also are a malcontent. You also, Raoul, have griefs to lay to the king. Follow our example, pass over into Belle-Isle. Then we shall see, I guarantee upon my honor, that in a month there will be war between France and Spain on the subject of this son of Louis XIII, who is an infante likewise, and whom France detains inhumanly. Now as Louis XIV would have no inclination for a war on that subject, I will answer for an arrangement, the result of which must bring greatness to Porthos and to me, and a duchy in France to you, who are already a grandee of Spain. Will you join us? No, for my part one prefer having something to reproach the king with. It is a pride natural to my race to pretend to a superiority over royal races. Doing what you propose, I should become the obliged of the king. I should certainly be the gainer on that ground, but I should be a loser in my conscience that, no thank you. Then give me two things, Athos, your absolution. Oh, I give it you if you really wish to avenge the weak and oppressed against the oppressor. That is sufficient for me, said Aramis, with a blush which was lost in the obscurity of the night. And now, give me your two best horses to gain the second post, as I have been refused any under the pretext of the Duc de Beaufort being traveling in this country. You shall have the two best horses, Aramis, and again I recommend poor Porthos strongly to your care. Oh, I have no fear on that score. One word more, do you think I am maneuvering for him as I ought? The evil being committed, yes, for the king would not pardon him, and you have, whatever may be said, always a supporter in M. Fouquet who will not abandon you, he being himself compromised, notwithstanding his heroic action. You are right. And that is why, instead of gaining the sea at once, which would proclaim my fear and guilt, that is why I remain upon French ground. But Belle-Isle will be for me whatever ground I wish it to be, English, Spanish, or Roman. All will depend with me, on the standard I shall think proper to unfurl. How so? It was I who fortified Belle-Isle, and so long as I defend it, nobody can take Belle-Isle from me. And then, as you have said just now, M. Fouquet is there. Belle-Isle will not be attacked without the signature of M. Fouquet. That is true. Nevertheless, be prudent. The king is both cunning and strong. Aramis smiled. I again recommend Porthos to you, repeated the Count, with a sort of cold persistence. Whatever becomes of me, Count, replied Aramis in the same tone, our brother Porthos will fare as I do, or better. Athos bowed whilst pressing the hand of Aramis, and turned to embrace Porthos with emotion. I was born lucky, was I not? Murmured the latter, transported with happiness as he folded his cloak round him. Come, my dear friend, said Aramis. Raoul had gone out to give orders for the saddling of the horses. The group was already divided. Athos saw his two friends on the point of departure, and something like a mist passed before his eyes and weighed upon his heart. It is strange, thought he, whence comes the inclination I feel to embrace Porthos once more? At that moment Porthos turned round, and he came towards his old friend with open arms. This last endearment was tender as in youth, as in times when hearts were warm, life happy. And then Porthos mounted his horse. Aramis came back once more to throw his arms round the neck of Athos. The latter watched them along the high road, elongated by the shade in their white cloaks. Like phantoms they seemed to enlarge on their departure from the earth, and it was not in the mist, but in the declivity of the ground that they disappeared. At the end of the perspective, both seemed to have given a spring with their feet, which made them vanish as if evaporated into cloudland. Then Athos, with a very heavy heart, returned towards the house, saying to Bragelonne, "Raoul, I don't know what it is that has just told me that I have seen those two for the last time." "It does not astonish me, monsieur, that you should have such a thought," replied the young man, "for I have at this moment the same, and think also that I shall never see Messrs. du Vallon and d'Herblay again." "Oh, you," replied the Count, "you speak like a man rendered sad by a different cause. You see everything in black. You are young, and if you chance never to see those old friends again, it will be because they no longer exist in the world in which you have yet many years to pass. But I—" Raoul shook his head sadly, and leaned upon the shoulder of the Count, without either of them finding another word in their hearts, which were ready to overflow. All at once a noise of horses and voices, from the extremity of the road to Blois, attracted their attention that way. Flambeau's bearers shook their torches merrily among the trees of their route, and turned round from time to time, to avoid distancing the horsemen who followed them. These flames, this noise, this dust of a dozen richly caparisoned horses, formed a strange contrast in the middle of the night with the melancholy and almost funereal disappearance of the two shadows of Aramis and Porthos. Athos went towards the house, but he had hardly reached the parterre, when the entrance gate appeared in a blaze. All the flambeaux stopped and appeared to inflame the road. A cry was heard of "Le Duc de Beaufort," and Athos sprang towards the door of his house. But the Duke had already alighted from his horse and was looking around him. "I am here, monseigneur," said Athos. "Ah, good evening, dear Count," said the prince, with that frank cordiality which won him so many hearts. "Is it too late for a friend?" "Ah, my dear prince, come in," said the Count. And M. de Beaufort leaning on the arm of Athos, they entered the house, followed by Raoul, who walked respectfully and modestly among the officers of the prince, with several of whom he was acquainted. Chapter 27. Monsieur de Beaufort. The prince turned round at the moment when Raoul, in order to leave him alone with Athos, was shutting the door, and preparing to go with the other officers into an adjoining apartment. "Is that the young man I have heard le Prince speak so highly of?" asked M. de Beaufort. "It is, monseigneur." "He is quite the soldier. Let him stay, Count, we cannot spare him." "Remain, Raoul, since monseigneur permits it," said Athos. "Ma foi. He is tall and handsome," continued the Duke. "Will you give him to me, monseigneur, if I ask him of you?" "How am I to understand you, monseigneur?" said Athos. "Why, I call upon you to bid you farewell." "Farewell?" "Yes, in good truth. Have you no idea of what I am about to become?" "Why, I suppose what you have always been, monseigneur, a valiant prince and an excellent gentleman. I am going to become an African prince, a Bedouin gentleman. The king is sending me to make conquests among the Arabs." "What is this you tell me, monseigneur? Strange, is it not? I, the Parisian par essence, I who have reigned in the faubourgs and have been called king of the Halles, I am going to pass from the place Malbert to the minarets of Gigeli. From a frondeur I am becoming an adventurer. Oh, monseigneur, if you did not yourself tell me that. It would not be credible, would it? Believe me, nevertheless, and we have but to bid each other farewell. This is what comes of getting into favor again." "Into favor?" "Yes, you smile." "Ah, my dear Count, do you know why I have accepted this enterprise? Can you guess?" "Because your Highness loves glory above everything." "Oh, no, there is no glory in firing muskets at savages. I see no glory in that, for my part, and it is more probable that I shall there meet with something else. But I have wished, and still wish earnestly, my dear Count, that my life should have that last facet, after all the whimsical exhibitions I have seen myself make during 50 years. For, in short, you must admit that it is sufficiently strange to be born the grandson of a king, to have made war against kings, to have been reckoned among the powers of the age, to have maintained my rank, to feel Henry IV. within me, to be great admiral of France, and then to go and get killed at Gigeli, among all those Turks, Saracens, and Moors. "Monseigneur, you harp with strange persistence on that theme," said Athos in an agitated voice. How can you suppose that so brilliant a destiny will be extinguished in that remote and miserable scene? And can you believe, upright and simple as you are, that if I go into Africa for this ridiculous motive, I will not endeavor to come out of it without ridicule? Shall I not give the world cause to speak of me? And to be spoken of nowadays when there are Monsieur le Prince, M. de Turenne and many others my contemporaries, I, Admiral of France, grandson of Henry IV, King of Paris, have I anything left but to get myself killed? Cordo. I will be talked of, I tell you, I shall be killed whether or not, if not there, somewhere else. Why, Monseigneur, this is mere exaggeration, and hitherto you have shown nothing exaggerated save in bravery. Pest. My dear friend, there is bravery in facing scurvy, dysentery, locusts, poisoned arrows, as my ancestor St. Louis did. Do you know those fellows still use poisoned arrows? And then, you know me of old, I fancy, and you know that when I once make up my mind to a thing, I perform it in grim earnest. Yes, you made up your mind to escape from Vincennes. Aye, but you aided me in that, my master, and apropos, I turned this way and that without seeing my old friend M. Vaugramont. How is he? M. Vaugramont is still your highness's most respectful servant, said Athos, smiling. I have 100 pistoles here for him, which I bring as a legacy. My will is made, Count. Ah, Monseigneur. Monseigneur. And you may understand that if Grimaud's name were to appear in my will, the Duke began to laugh. Then addressing Raoul, who from the commencement of this conversation had sunk into a profound reverie, young man, said he, I know there is to be found here a certain de Vouvray wine, and I believe, Raoul left the room precipitately to order the wine. In the meantime M. de Beaufort took the hand of Athos. What do you mean to do with him? Asked he. Nothing at present, Monseigneur. Ah, yes, I know, since the passion of the king for La Valliere. Yes, Monseigneur. That is all true then, is it? I think I know her, that little La Valliere. She is not particularly handsome if I remember right? No, Monseigneur, said Athos. Do you know whom she reminds me of? Does she remind your highness of anyone? She reminds me of a very agreeable girl whose mother lived in the Halles. Ah, said Athos, smiling. Oh, the good old times, added M. de Beaufort. Yes, La Valliere reminds me of that girl. Who had a son, had she not? 3. I believe she had, replied the Duke, with careless naivete and a complacent forgetfulness, of which no words could translate the tone and the vocal expression. Now here is poor Raoul, who is your son, I believe? Yes, he is my son, Monseigneur. And the poor lad has been cut out by the king, and he frets. Still better, Monseigneur, he abstains. You are going to let the boy rust in idleness. It is a mistake. Come, give him to me. My wish is to keep him at home, Monseigneur. I have no longer anything in the world but him, and as long as he likes to remain. Well, well, replied the Duke. I could, nevertheless, have soon put matters to rights again. I assure you, I think he has in him the stuff of which marechals of France are made. I have seen more than one produced from less likely rough material. That is very possible, Monseigneur, but it is the king who makes marechals of France, and Raoul will never accept anything of the king. Raoul interrupted this conversation by his return. He preceded Grimaud, whose still steady hands carried the plateau with one glass and a bottle of the Duke's favorite wine. On seeing his old protégé, the Duke uttered an exclamation of pleasure. Grimaud. Good evening, Grimaud, said he. How goes it? The servant bowed profoundly, as much gratified as his noble interlocutor. 2 old friends, said the Duke, shaking honest Grimaud's shoulder after a vigorous fashion, which was followed by another still more profound and delighted bow from Grimaud. But what is this, Count, only one glass? I should not think of drinking with your highness, unless your highness permitted me, replied Athos, with noble humility. Cordo. You were right to bring only one glass. We will both drink out of it like 2 brothers in arms. Begin, Count. Do me the honor, said Athos, gently putting back the glass. You are a charming friend, replied the Duc de Beaufort, who drank and passed the goblet to his companion. But that is not all, continued he. I am still thirsty, and I wish to do honor to this handsome young man who stands here. I carry good luck with me, Vicomte, said he to Raoul. Wish for something while drinking out of my glass, and may the black plague grab me if what you wish does not come to pass. He held the goblet to Raoul, who hastily moistened his lips, and replied with the same promptitude. I have wished for something, Monseigneur. His eyes sparkled with a gloomy fire, and the blood mounted to his cheeks. He terrified Athos, if only with his smile. And what have you wished for? Replied the Duke, sinking back into his fauteuil, whilst with one hand he returned the bottle to Grimaud, and with the other gave him a purse. "Will you promise me, Monseigneur, to grant me what I wish for?" "Pardieu, that is agreed upon." "I wished, Monsieur le Duc, to go with you to Gigelli." Athos became pale, and was unable to conceal his agitation. The Duke looked at his friend as if desirous to assist him to parry this unexpected blow. "That is difficult, my dear Vicomte, very difficult," added he in a lower tone of voice. "Pardon me, Monseigneur, I have been indiscreet," replied Raoul in a firm voice, "but as you yourself invited me to wish." "To wish to leave me?" said Athos. "Oh, monsieur, can you imagine?" "Well, mordieu," cried the Duke, "the young Vicomte is right. What can he do here? He will go mouldy with grief." Raoul blushed, and the excitable prince continued, "War is a distraction. We gain everything by it. We can only lose one thing by it, life, then so much the worse." "That is to say, memory," said Raoul eagerly, "and that is to say, so much the better." He repented of having spoken so warmly when he saw Athos rise and open the window, which was doubtless to conceal his emotion. Raoul sprang towards the Count, but the latter had already overcome his emotion, and turned to the lights with a serene and impassible countenance. "Well, come," said the Duke, "let us see. Shall he go or shall he not? If he goes, Count, he shall be my aide-de-camp, my son." "Monseigneur," cried Raoul, bending his knee. "Monseigneur," cried Athos, taking the hand of the Duke, "Raoul shall do just as he likes." "Oh, no, monsieur, just as you like," interrupted the young man. "Par la corbleu," said the prince in his turn, "it is neither the Count nor the Vicomte that shall have his way, it is I. I will take him away. The marine offers a superb fortune, my friend." Raoul smiled again so sadly, that this time Athos felt his heart penetrated by it, and replied to him by a severe look. Raoul comprehended it all. He recovered his calmness and was so guarded, that not another word escaped him. The Duke at length rose, on observing the advanced hour, and said with animation, "I am in great haste, but if I am told I have lost time in talking with a friend, I will reply I have gained, on the balance, a most excellent recruit." "Pardon me, Monsieur le Duc," interrupted Raoul, "do not tell the king so, for it is not the king I wish to serve." "My friend, whom then will you serve? The times are past when you might have said, I belong to M. de Beaufort. No, nowadays we all belong to the king, great or small. Therefore, if you serve on board my vessels, there can be nothing equivocal about it, my dear Vicomte, it will be the king you will serve." Athos waited with a kind of impatient joy for the reply about to be made to this embarrassing question by Raoul, the intractable enemy of the king, his rival. The father hoped that the obstacle would overcome the desire. He was thankful to M. de Beaufort, whose lightness or generous reflection had thrown an impediment in the way of the departure of a son, now his only joy. But Raoul, still firm and tranquil, replied, "Monsieur le Duc, the objection you make I have already considered in my mind. I will serve on board your vessels, because you do me the honor to take me with you, but I shall there serve a more powerful master than the king. I shall serve God." "God? How so?" said the Duke and Athos together. "My intention is to make profession and become a Knight of Malta," added Bragelonne, letting fall, one by one, words more icy than the drops which fall from the bare trees after the tempests of winter. For, under this blow Athos staggered and the prince himself was moved. Grimaud uttered a heavy groan and let fall the bottle, which was broken without anybody paying attention. De Beaufort looked the young man in the face and read plainly, though his eyes were cast down, the fire of resolution before which everything must give way. As to Athos, he was too well acquainted with that tender but inflexible soul. He could not hope to make it deviate from the fatal road it had just chosen. He could only press the hand the Duke held out to him. "Count, I shall set off in 2 days for Toulon," said M. de Beaufort. "Will you meet me at Paris, in order that I may know your determination?" "I will have the honor of thanking you there, mon prince, for all your kindness," replied the Count. "And be sure to bring the Vicomte with you, whether he follows me or does not follow me," added the Duke. "He has my word, and I only ask yours." Having thrown a little balm upon the wound of the paternal heart, he pulled the ear of Grimaud, whose eyes sparkled more than usual, and regained his escort in the parterre. The horses, rested and refreshed, set off with spirit through the lovely night, and soon placed a considerable distance between their master and the chateau. Athos and Bragelonne were again face to face. 11 o'clock was striking. The father and son preserved a profound silence towards each other, where an intelligent observer would have expected cries and tears. But these two men were of such a nature that all emotion following their final resolutions plunged itself so deep into their hearts that it was lost forever. They passed, then, silently and almost breathlessly, the hour that preceded midnight. The clock, by striking, alone pointed out to them how many minutes had lasted the painful journey made by their souls in the immensity of their remembrances of the past and fear of the future. Athos rose first, saying, "It is late, then. Till tomorrow." Raoul rose, and in his turn embraced his father. The latter held him clasped to his breast and said in a tremulous voice, "In 2 days you will have left me, my son, left me forever, Raoul." "Monsieur," replied the young man, "I had formed a determination, that of piercing my heart with my sword, but you would have thought that cowardly. I have renounced that determination, and therefore we must part. You leave me desolate by going, Raoul? Listen to me again, monsieur, I implore you. If I do not go, I shall die here of grief and love. I know how long a time I have to live thus. Send me away quickly, monsieur, or you will see me basely die before your eyes, in your house. This is stronger than my will, stronger than my strength. You may plainly see that within 1 month I have lived 30 years, and that I approach the end of my life." "Then," said Athos coldly, "you go with the intention of getting killed in Africa? Oh, tell me. Do not lie." Raoul grew deadly pale, and remained silent for 2 seconds, which were to his father 2 hours of agony. Then all at once, "Monsieur," said he, "I have promised to devote myself to God. In exchange for the sacrifice I make of my youth and liberty, I will only ask of him one thing, and that is, to preserve me for you, because you are the only tie which attaches me to this world. God alone can give me the strength not to forget that I owe you everything, and that nothing ought to stand in my esteem before you." Athos embraced his son tenderly and said, "You have just replied to me on the word of honor of an honest man. In 2 days we shall be with M. de Beaufort at Paris, and you will then do what will be proper for you to do. You are free, Raoul, adieu." And he slowly gained his bedroom. Raoul went down into the garden, and passed the night in the alley of limes. Chapter 28. Preparations for departure. Athos lost no more time in combating this immutable resolution. He gave all his attention to preparing, during the 2 days the Duke had granted him, the proper appointments for Raoul. This labor chiefly concerned Grimaud, who immediately applied himself to it with the goodwill and intelligence we know he possessed. Athos gave this worthy servant orders to take the route to Paris when the equipment should be ready, and not to expose himself to the danger of keeping the Duke waiting or delaying Raoul, so that the Duke should perceive his absence. He himself, the day after the visit of M. de Beaufort, set off for Paris with his son. For the poor young man it was an emotion easily to be understood, thus to return to Paris amongst all the people who had known and loved him. Every face recalled a pang to him who had suffered so much, to him who had loved so much, some circumstance of his unhappy love. Raoul, on approaching Paris, felt as if he were dying. Once in Paris he really existed no longer. When he reached Guiche's residence, he was informed that Guiche was with Monsieur. Raoul took the road to the Luxembourg, and when arrived, without suspecting that he was going to the place where La Valliere had lived, he heard so much music and respired so many perfumes, he heard so much joyous laughter, and saw so many dancing shadows, that if it had not been for a charitable woman who perceived him so dejected and pale beneath a doorway, he would have remained there a few minutes, and then would have gone away, never to return. But, as we have said, in the first antechamber he had stopped, solely for the sake of not mixing himself with all those happy beings he felt were moving around him in the adjacent salons. And as one of Monsieur's servants, recognizing him, had asked him if he wished to see Monsieur or Madame, Raoul had scarcely answered him, but had sunk down upon a bench near the velvet doorway looking at a clock, which had stopped for nearly an hour. The servant had passed on, and another, better acquainted with him, had come up, and interrogated Raoul whether he should inform M. de Guiche of his being there. This name did not even arouse the recollections of Raoul. The persistent servant went on to relate that de Guiche had just invented a new game of lottery, and was teaching it to the ladies. Raoul, opening his large eyes, like the absent man in Theophrastus, made no answer, but his sadness increased 2 shades. With his head hanging down, his limbs relaxed, his mouth half open for the escape of his sighs, Raoul remained, thus forgotten, in the antechamber, when all at once a lady's robe passed, rubbing against the doors of a side salon, which opened on the gallery. A lady, young, pretty, and gay, scolding an officer of the household, entered by that way, and expressed herself with much vivacity. The officer replied in calm but firm sentences. It was rather a little love pet than a quarrel of courtiers, and was terminated by a kiss on the fingers of the lady. Suddenly, on perceiving Raoul, the lady became silent, and pushing away the officer, "Make your escape, Malicorne," said she. I did not think there was anyone here. I shall curse you, if they have either heard or seen us." Malicorne hastened away. The young lady advanced behind Raoul, and stretching her joyous face over him as he lay. "Monsieur is a gallant man," said she, "and no doubt—" She here interrupted herself by uttering a cry. "Raoul," said she, blushing. "Mademoiselle de Montalais," said Raoul, paler than death. He rose unsteadily and tried to make his way across the slippery mosaic of the floor, but she had comprehended that savage and cruel grief. She felt that in the flight of Raoul there was an accusation of herself. A woman, ever vigilant, she did not think she ought to let the opportunity slip of making good her justification. But Raoul, though stopped by her in the middle of the gallery, did not seem disposed to surrender without a combat. He took it up in a tone so cold and embarrassed, that if they had been thus surprised, the whole court would have no doubt about the proceedings of Mademoiselle de Montalais. "Ah, monsieur," said she with disdain, "what you are doing is very unworthy of a gentleman. My heart inclines me to speak to you. You compromise me by a reception almost uncivil. You are wrong, monsieur, and you confound your friends with enemies. Farewell." Raoul had sworn never to speak of Louise, never even to look at those who might have seen Louise. He was going into another world, that he might never meet with anything Louise had seen or even touched. But after the first shock of his pride, after having had a glimpse of Montalais, the companion of Louise, Montalais, who reminded him of the turret of Blois and the joys of youth, all his reason faded away. "Pardon me, mademoiselle, it cannot enter into my thoughts to be uncivil." "Do you wish to speak to me?" said she, with the smile of former days. "Well, come somewhere else, for we may be surprised." "Oh," said he. She looked at the clock doubtingly, then, having reflected, "In my apartment," said she, "we shall have an hour to ourselves." And taking her course lighter than a fairy, she ran up to her chamber, followed by Raoul. Shutting the door, and placing in the hands of her camerist the mantle she had held upon her arm. "You were seeking M. de Guiche, were you not?" said she to Raoul. "Yes, mademoiselle." "I will go and ask him to come up here presently after I have spoken to you." "Do so, mademoiselle." "Are you angry with me?" Raoul looked at her for a moment, then casting down his eyes, "Yes," said he. "You think I was concerned in the plot which brought about the rupture, do you not?" "Rupture?" said he with bitterness. "Oh, mademoiselle, there can be no rupture where there has been no love." "You are in error," replied Montalais. "Louise did love you." Raoul started. "Not with love, I know, but she liked you, and you ought to have married her before you set out for London." Raoul broke into a sinister laugh, which made Montalais shudder. "You tell me that very much at your ease, mademoiselle? Do people marry whom they like? You forget that the king then kept for himself as his mistress her of whom we are speaking." "Listen," said the young woman, pressing the hands of Raoul in her own. "You were wrong in every way. A man of your age ought never to leave a woman of hers alone." "There is no longer any faith in the world, then?" said Raoul. "No, Vicomte," said Montalais quietly. "Nevertheless, let me tell you that if, instead of loving Louise coldly and philosophically, you had endeavored to awaken her to love—" "Enough, I pray you, mademoiselle," said Raoul. "I feel as though you are all, of both sexes, of a different age from me. You can laugh and you can banter agreeably. Mademoiselle, I loved Mademoiselle de—" Raoul could not pronounce her name. "I loved her well. I put my faith in her. Now I am quits by loving her no longer." "Oh, Vicomte," said Montalais, pointing to his reflection in a looking-glass. "I know what you mean, mademoiselle. I am much altered, am I not? Well, do you know why? Because my face is the mirror of my heart, the outer surface changed to match the mind within." "You are consoled, then?" said Montalais sharply. "No, I shall never be consoled. I don't understand you, M. de Bragelonne. I care but little for that. I do not quite understand myself." "You have not even tried to speak to Louise?" "Oh, I," exclaimed the young man with eyes flashing fire. "I. Why do you not advise me to marry her? Perhaps the king would consent now." And he rose from his chair full of anger. "I see," said Montalais, "that you are not cured, and that Louise has one enemy the more." "One enemy the more." "Yes, favorites are but little beloved at the court of France." "Oh, while she has her lover to protect her, is not that enough? She has chosen him of such a quality that her enemies cannot prevail against her. But, stopping all at once, and then she has you for a friend, mademoiselle," added he, with a shade of irony which did not glide off the cuirass. "Oh no, I am no longer one of those whom Mademoiselle de la Valliere condescends to look upon. But so big with menace and with storm. This but which made the heart of Raoul beat, such griefs did it presage for her whom lately he loved so dearly. This terrible but so significant in a woman like Montalais, was interrupted by a moderately loud noise heard by the speakers proceeding from the alcove behind the wainscoting. Montalais turned to listen, and Raoul was already rising, when a lady entered the room quietly by the secret door, which she closed after her. "Madame," exclaimed Raoul on recognizing the sister-in-law of the king. "Stupid wretch," murmured Montalais, throwing herself but too late before the princess, "I have been mistaken in an hour." She had, however, time to warn the princess, who was walking towards Raoul. "De Bragelonne, madame," and at these words the princess drew back, uttering a cry in her turn. "Your Royal Highness," said Montalais with volubility, "is kind enough to think of this lottery and—" The princess began to lose countenance. Raoul hastened his departure without divining all, but he felt that he was in the way. Madame was preparing a word of transition to recover herself, when a closet opened in front of the alcove, and M. de Guiche issued, all radiant, also from that closet. The palest of the four, we must admit, was still Raoul. The princess, however, was near fainting, and was obliged to lean upon the foot of the bed for support. No one ventured to support her. This scene occupied several minutes of terrible suspense. But Raoul broke it. He went up to the count, whose inexpressible emotion made his knees tremble, and taking his hand, "Dear count," said he, "tell madame I am too unhappy not to merit pardon. Tell her also that I have loved in the course of my life, and that the horror of the treachery that has been practiced on me renders me inexorable towards all other treachery that may be committed around me. This is why, mademoiselle," said he, smiling to Montalais, "I never would divulge the secret of the visits of my friend to your apartment. Obtain from madame, who is so clement and so generous, obtain her pardon for you whom she has just surprised also. You are both free, love each other, be happy." The princess felt for a moment a despair that cannot be described. It was repugnant to her, notwithstanding the exquisite delicacy which Raoul had exhibited, to feel herself at the mercy of one who had discovered such an indiscretion. It was equally repugnant to her to accept the evasion offered by this delicate deception. Agitated, nervous, she struggled against the double stings of these two troubles. Raoul comprehended her position, and came once more to her aid. Bending his knee before her, "Madame," said he in a low voice, "in 2 days I shall be far from Paris. In a fortnight I shall be far from France, where I shall never be seen again." "Are you going away then?" said she with great delight. "With M. de Beaufort." "Into Africa," cried de Guiche in his turn. "You, Raoul? Oh, my friend, into Africa where everybody dies." And forgetting everything, forgetting that forgetfulness itself compromised the princess more eloquently than his presence, "Ingrate," said he, "and you have not even consulted me." And he embraced him, during which time Montalais had led away madame and disappeared herself. Raoul passed his hand over his brow and said with a smile, "I have been dreaming." Then warmly to Guiche, who by degrees absorbed him, "My friend," said he, "I conceal nothing from you who are the elected of my heart. I am going to seek death in yonder country. Your secret will not remain in my breast more than a year." "Oh Raoul, a man! Do you know what is my thought, Count? This is it, I shall live more vividly being buried beneath the earth, than I have lived for this month past. We are Christians, my friend, and if such sufferings were to continue, I would not be answerable for the safety of my soul." De Guiche was anxious to raise objections. "Not one word more on my account," said Raoul, "but advice to you, dear friend. What I am going to say to you is of much greater importance." "What is that?" "Without doubt you risk much more than I do because you love." "Oh, it is a joy so sweet to me to be able to speak to you thus." "Well then, de Guiche, beware of Montalais." "What? Of that kind friend? She was the friend of her you know of. She ruined her by pride." "You are mistaken. And now, when she has ruined her, she would ravish from her the only thing that renders that woman excusable in my eyes." "What is that?" "Her love." "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that there is a plot formed against her who is the mistress of the king, a plot formed in the very house of madame." "Can you think so?" "I am certain of it." "By Montalais? Take her as the least dangerous of the enemies I dread for the other. Explain yourself clearly, my friend, and if I can understand you." "In 2 words. Madame has been long jealous of the king." "I know she has." "Oh, fear nothing. You are beloved, Count. Do you feel the value of these 3 words?" They signify that you can raise your head, that you can sleep tranquilly, that you can thank God every minute of your life. You are beloved. That signifies that you may hear everything, even the counsel of a friend who wishes to preserve your happiness. You are beloved, de Guiche, you are beloved. You do not endure those atrocious nights, those nights without end, which, with arid eye and fainting heart, others pass through who are destined to die. You will live long if you act like the miser who, bit by bit, crumb by crumb, collects and heaps up diamonds and gold. You are beloved. Allow me to tell you what you must do that you may be beloved forever. De Guiche contemplated for some time this unfortunate young man, half mad with despair, till there passed through his heart something like remorse at his own happiness. Raoul suppressed his feverish excitement, to assume the voice and countenance of an impassible man. They will make her, whose name I should wish still to be able to pronounce, they will make her suffer. Swear to me that you will not second them in anything, but that you will defend her when possible, as I would have done myself. I swear I will, replied de Guiche. And, continued Raoul, some day when you shall have rendered her a great service, some day when she shall thank you, promise me to say these words to her: I have done you this kindness, madame, at the warm request of M. de Bragelonne, whom you so deeply injured. I swear I will, murmured de Guiche. That is all. Adieu. I set out tomorrow or the day after for Toulon. If you have a few hours to spare, give them to me. All? All? Cried the young man. Thank you. And what are you going to do now? I am going to meet M. Le Comte at Planchet's residence, where we hope to find M. D'Artagnan. M. D'Artagnan? Yes, I wish to embrace him before my departure. He is a brave man who loves me dearly. Farewell, my friend, you are expected, no doubt. You will find me when you wish at the lodgings of the Comte. Farewell. The two young men embraced. Those who chanced to see them both thus, would not have hesitated to say, pointing to Raoul, that is the happy man. Chapter 29. Planchet's Inventory. Athos, during the visit made to the Luxembourg by Raoul, had gone to Planchet's residence to inquire after D'Artagnan. The Comte, on arriving at the Rue de Lombards, found the shop of the grocer in great confusion, but it was not the encumberment of a lucky sale, or that of an arrival of goods. Planchet was not enthroned as usual on sacks and barrels. No. A young man with a pen behind his ear, and another with an account book in his hand, were setting down a number of figures, whilst a third counted and weighed. An inventory was being taken. Athos, who had no knowledge of commercial matters, felt himself a little embarrassed by material obstacles and the majesty of those who were thus employed. He saw several customers sent away, and asked himself whether he, who came to buy nothing, would not be more properly deemed importunate. He therefore asked very politely if he could see M. Planchet. The reply, quite carelessly given, was that M. Planchet was packing his trunks. These words surprised Athos. What? His trunks? Said he. Is M. Planchet going away? Yes, monsieur, directly. Then, if you please, inform him that M. le Comte de la Fère desires to speak to him for a moment. At the mention of the Comte's name, one of the young men, no doubt accustomed to hear it pronounced with respect, immediately went to inform Planchet. It was at this moment that Raoul, after his painful scene with Montalais and de Guiche, arrived at the grocer's house. Planchet left his job directly he received the Comte's message. Ah, Monsieur le Comte, exclaimed he, how glad I am to see you. What good star brings you here? My dear Planchet, said Athos, pressing the hand of his son, whose sad look he silently observed, we are come to learn of you, but in what confusion do I find you? You are as white as a miller. Where have you been rummaging? Ah, diable! Take care, monsieur, don't come near me till I have well shaken myself. What for? Flour or dust only whiten? No, no, what you see on my arms is arsenic. Arsenic? Yes, I am taking my precautions against rats. I suppose in an establishment like this, rats play a conspicuous part. It is not with this establishment I concern myself, Monsieur le Comte. The rats have robbed me of more here than they will ever rob me of again. What do you mean? Why, you may have observed, monsieur, my inventory is being taken. Are you leaving trade then? Mon Dieu. Yes. I have disposed of my business to one of my young men. Bah. You are rich then, I suppose? Monsieur, I have taken a dislike to the city. I don't know whether it is because I am growing old, and as M. D'Artagnan one day said, when we grow old we more often think of the adventures of our youth, but for some time past I have felt myself attracted towards the country and gardening. I was a countryman formerly. Anne Planchet marked this confession with a rather pretentious laugh for a man making profession of humility. Athos made a gesture of approval and then added, "You are going to buy an estate, then?" "I have bought one, monsieur." "Ah, that is still better. A little house at Fontainebleau, with something like 20 acres of land round it." "Very well, Planchet. Accept my compliments on your acquisition." "But, monsieur, we are not comfortable here, the cursed dust makes you cough." "Corbeau, I do not wish to poison the most worthy gentleman in the kingdom." Athos did not smile at this little pleasantry which Planchet had aimed at him, in order to try his strength in mundane facetiousness. "Yes," said Athos, "let us have a little talk by ourselves, in your own room for example. You have a room, have you not?" "Certainly, monsieur le comte." "Upstairs, perhaps?" And Athos, seeing Planchet a little embarrassed, wished to relieve him by going first. "It is, but," said Planchet, hesitating. Athos was mistaken in the cause of this hesitation, and attributing it to a fear the grocer might have of offering humble hospitality. Never mind, said he, still going up. "The dwelling of a tradesman in this quarter is not expected to be a palace. Come on." Raoul nimbly preceded him and entered first. 2 cries were heard simultaneously, we may say 3. One of these cries dominated the others. It emanated from a woman. Another proceeded from the mouth of Raoul. It was an exclamation of surprise. He had no sooner uttered it than he shut the door sharply. The third was from fright. It came from Planchet. "I ask your pardon," added he, "Madame is dressing?" Raoul had no doubt seen that what Planchet said was true, for he turned round to go downstairs again. "Madame," said Athos. "Oh, pardon me, Planchet, I did not know that you had upstairs." "It is Truchen," added Planchet, blushing a little. "It is whoever you please, my good Planchet, but pardon my rudeness." No, go up now, gentlemen." "We will do no such thing," said Athos. "Oh, Madame, having notice, has had time." "No, Planchet, farewell." Gentlemen, you would not disoblige me by thus standing on the staircase, or by going away without having sat down." "If we had known you had a lady upstairs," replied Athos with his customary coolness, "we would have asked permission to pay our respects to her." Planchet was so disconcerted by this little extravagance, that he forced the passage, and himself opened the door to admit the Count and his son. Truchen was quite dressed, in the costume of the shopkeeper's wife, rich yet coquettish, German eyes attacking French eyes. She left the apartment after 2 courtesies, and went down into the shop, but not without having listened at the door, to know what Planchet's gentlemen visitors would say of her. Athos suspected that, and therefore turned the conversation accordingly. Planchet, on his part, was burning to give explanations, which Athos avoided. But, as certain tenacities are stronger than others, Athos was forced to hear Planchet recite his idyls of felicity, translated into a language more chaste than that of Longus. So Planchet related how Truchen had charmed the years of his advancing age, and brought good luck to his business as Ruth did to Boaz. "You want nothing now then but heirs to your property." "If I had one he would have 300,000 livres," said Planchet. "Humph! You must have one then," said Athos phlegmatically, "if only to prevent your little fortune being lost." This word little fortune placed Planchet in his rank, like the voice of the sergeant when Planchet was but a piqueur in the regiment of Piedmont, in which Rochefort had placed him. Athos perceived that the grocer would marry Truchen, and, in spite of fate, establish a family. This appeared the more evident to him when he learned that the young man to whom Planchet was selling the business was her cousin. Having heard all that was necessary of the happy prospects of the retiring grocer, "What is M. d'Artagnan about?" said he. "He is not at the Louvre." "Ah, Monsieur le Comte, Monsieur d'Artagnan has disappeared." "Disappeared?" said Athos in surprise. "Oh, monsieur, we know what that means." "But I do not know. Whenever M. d'Artagnan disappears it is always for some mission or some great affair." "Has he said anything to you about it?" "Never." "You were acquainted with his departure for England formerly, were you not?" "On account of the speculation," said Planchet heedlessly. "The speculation?" "I mean," interrupted Planchet, quite confused. Well, neither your affairs nor those of your master are in question. The interest we take in him alone has induced me to apply to you. Since the captain of the Musketeers is not here, and as we cannot learn from you where we are likely to find M. d'Artagnan, we will take our leave of you. Au revoir, Planchet, au revoir. Let us be gone, Raoul." "Monsieur le Comte, I wish I were able to tell you." "Oh, not at all. I am not the man to reproach a servant with discretion." This word servant struck rudely on the ears of the demi-millionaire Planchet, but natural respect and bonhomie prevailed over pride. There is nothing indiscreet in telling you, Monsieur le Comte, and D'Artagnan came here the other day. Aha! And remained several hours consulting a geographical chart. You are right then, my friend, say no more about it. And the chart is there as a proof, added Planchet, who went to fetch from the neighboring wall, where it was suspended by a twist, forming a triangle with the bar of the window to which it was fastened, the plan consulted by the captain on his last visit to Planchet. This plan, which he brought to the Comte, was a map of France, upon which the practiced eye of that gentleman discovered an itinerary, marked out with small pins. Wherever a pin was missing, a hole denoted its having been there. Athos, by following with his eye the pins and holes, saw that D'Artagnan had taken the direction of the south, and gone as far as the Mediterranean, towards Toulon. It was near Caen that the marks and the punctured places ceased. The Comte de la Fere puzzled his brains for some time, to divine what the Musketeer could be going to do at Caen, and what motive could have led him to examine the banks of the Varius. The reflections of Athos suggested nothing. His accustomed perspicacity was at fault. Raoul's researches were not more successful than his father's. "Never mind," said the young man to the Comte, who silently and with his finger had made him understand the route of D'Artagnan. "We must confess that there is a providence always occupied in connecting our destiny with that of M. D'Artagnan. There he is on the coast of Caen, and you, monsieur, will at least conduct me as far as Toulon. Be assured that we shall meet with him more easily upon our route than on this map." Then, taking leave of Planchet, who was scolding his shopmen, even the cousin of Truchen, his successor, the gentleman set out to pay a visit to M. de Beaufort. On leaving the grocer's shop, they saw a coach, the future depository of the charms of Mademoiselle Truchen and Planchet's bags of crowns. "Every one journeys towards happiness by the route he chooses," said Raoul in a melancholy tone. "Road to Fontainebleau," cried Planchet to his coachman. Chapter 30. The inventory of M. de Beaufort. To have talked of D'Artagnan with Planchet, to have seen Planchet quit Paris to bury himself in his country retreat, had been for Athos and his son like a last farewell to the noise of the capital, to their life of former days. What, in fact, did these men leave behind them, one of whom had exhausted the past age in glory, and the other the present age in misfortune? Evidently neither of them had anything to ask of his contemporaries. They had only to pay a visit to M. de Beaufort, and arrange with him the particulars of departure. The Duke was lodged magnificently in Paris. He had one of those superb establishments pertaining to great fortunes, the like of which certain old men remember to have seen in all their glory in the times of wasteful liberality of Henry III's reign. Then really several great nobles were richer than the king. They knew it, used it, and never deprived themselves of the pleasure of humiliating his royal majesty when they had an opportunity. It was this egotistical aristocracy Richelieu had constrained to contribute, with its blood, its purse and its duties, to what was from his time styled the king's service. From Louis XI, that terrible mower down of the great, to Richelieu, how many families had raised their heads? How many, from Richelieu to Louis XIV, had bowed their heads, never to raise them again? But M. de Beaufort was born a prince, and of a blood which is not shed upon scaffolds, unless by the decree of peoples. A prince who had kept up a grand style of living. How did he maintain his horses, his people, and his table? Nobody knew, himself less than others. Only there were then privileges for the sons of kings, to whom nobody refused to become a creditor, whether from respect or the persuasion that they would some day be paid. Athos and Raoul found the mansion of the Duke in as much confusion as that of Planchet. The Duke, likewise, was making his inventory, that is to say, he was distributing to his friends everything of value he had in his house. Owing nearly 2 millions, an enormous amount in those days, M. de Beaufort had calculated that he could not set out for Africa without a good round sum, and in order to find that sum, he was distributing to his old creditors plate, arms, jewels, and furniture, which was more magnificent in selling it, and brought him back double. In fact, how could a man to whom 10,000 livres were owing, refuse to carry away a present worth 6,000, enhanced in estimation from having belonged to a descendant of Henry IV? And how, after having carried away that present, could he refuse 10,000 livres more to this generous noble? This, then, was what had happened. The Duke had no longer a dwelling house, that had become useless to an admiral whose place of residence is his ship. He had no longer need of superfluous arms, when he was placed amidst his cannons. No more jewels, which the sea might rob him of, but he had 300,000 or 400,000 crowns fresh in his coffers. And throughout the house there was a joyous movement of people who believed they were plundering Monseigneur. The prince had, in a supreme degree, the art of making happy the creditors most to be pitied. Every distressed man, every empty purse, found in him patience and sympathy for his position. To some he said, "I wish I had what you have, I would give it you." And to others, "I have but this silver ewer, it is worth at least 500 livres, take it." The effect of which was, so truly is courtesy a current payment, that the prince constantly found means to renew his creditors. This time he used no ceremony, it might be called a general pillage. He gave up everything. The oriental fable of the poor Arab who carried away from the pillage of palace a kettle at the bottom of which was concealed a bag of gold, and whom everybody allowed to pass without jealousy, this fable had become a truth in the prince's mansion. Many contractors paid themselves upon the offices of the duke. Thus, the provision department, who plundered the clothes presses and the harness rooms, attached very little value to things which tailors and saddlers set great store by. Anxious to carry home to their wives presents given them by Monseigneur, many were seen bounding joyously along, under the weight of earthen jars and bottles, gloriously stamped with the arms of the prince. De Beaufort finished by giving away his horses and the hay from his lofts. He made more than 30 happy with kitchen utensils, and 30 more with the contents of his cellar. Still further, all these people went away with the conviction that M. de Beaufort only acted in this manner to prepare for a new fortune concealed beneath the Arabs' tents. They repeated to each other, while pillaging his hotel, that he was sent to Jejeli by the king to reconstruct his lost fortunes, that the treasures of Africa would be equally divided between the admiral and the king of France, that these treasures consisted in mines of diamonds or other fabulous stones. The gold and silver mines of Mount Atlas did not even obtain the honor of being named. In addition to the mines to be worked, which could not be begun till after the campaign, there would be the booty made by the army. De Beaufort would lay his hands on all the riches pirates had robbed Christendom of since the Battle of Lepanto. The number of millions from these sources defied calculation. Why then should he who was going in quest of such treasure, set any store by the poor utensils of his past life? And reciprocally, why should they spare the property of him who spared it so little himself? Such was the position of affairs. Athos, with his piercing practiced glance, saw what was going on at once. He found the Admiral of France a little exalted, for he was rising from a table of 50 covers, at which the guests had drunk long and deeply to the prosperity of the expedition, at the conclusion of which repast, the remains, with the dessert, had been given to the servants, and the empty dishes and plates to the curious. The prince was intoxicated with his ruin and his popularity at one and the same time. He had drunk his old wine to the health of his wine of the future. When he saw Athos and Raoul, "There is my aide-de-camp being brought to me," he cried. "Come hither, Comte, come hither, Vicomte." Athos tried to find a passage through the heaps of linen and plate. Step over, said the duke, offering a full glass to Athos. The latter drank it. Raoul scarcely moistened his lips. "Here is your commission," said the prince to Raoul. "I had prepared it, reckoning upon you. You will go before me as far as Antibes." "Yes, monseigneur." "Here is the order." And de Beaufort gave Raoul the order. "Do you know anything of the sea?" "Yes, monseigneur, I have traveled with M. le Prince." "That is well. All these barges and lighters must be in attendance to form an escort and carry my provisions. The army must be prepared to embark in a fortnight at the very latest." "That shall be done, monseigneur." "The present order gives you the right to visit and search all the isles along the coast. You will there make the enrollments and levies you may want for me." "Yes, monsieur le duc." "And you are an active man and will work freely, you will spend much money." "I hope not, monseigneur. But I am sure you will. My intendant has prepared the orders of 1,000 livres, drawn upon the cities of the south. He will give you 100 of them. Now, dear Vicomte, be gone." Athos interrupted the prince. "Keep your money, monseigneur. War is to be waged among the Arabs with gold as well as lead." "I wish to try the contrary," replied the duke, "and then you are acquainted with my ideas upon the expedition. Plenty of noise, plenty of fire, and if so it must be, I shall disappear in the smoke." Having spoken thus, M. de Beaufort began to laugh, but his mirth was not reciprocated by Athos and Raoul. He perceived this at once. "Ah," said he, with the courteous egotism of his rank and age, "you are such people as a man should not see after dinner. You are cold, stiff, and dry when I am all fire, suppleness, and wine. No, devil take me. I should always see you fasting, Vicomte, and you, Comte, if you wear such a face as that, you shall see me no more." He said this, pressing the hand of Athos, who replied with a smile, "Monseigneur, do not talk so grandly because you happen to have plenty of money. I predict that within a month you will be dry, stiff, and cold in presence of your strongbox, and that then, having Raoul at your elbow, fasting, you will be surprised to see him gay, animated, and generous because he will have some new crowns to offer you." "God grant it may be so," cried the delighted duke. "Can't stay with me." "No, I shall go with Raoul. The mission with which you charge him is a troublesome and difficult one. Alone it would be too much for him to execute. You do not observe, Monseigneur, you have given him command of the first order." "Bah! And in your naval arrangements too." "That may be true. But one finds that such fine young fellows as your son generally do all that is required of them. Monseigneur, I believe you will find nowhere so much zeal and intelligence, so much real bravery as in Raoul. But if he failed to arrange your embarkation, you would only meet the fate that you deserve." "Humph! You are scolding me then." "Monseigneur, to provision a fleet, to assemble a flotilla, to enroll your maritime force, would take an admiral a year. Raoul is a cavalry officer, and you allow him a fortnight. I tell you he will do it." "He may, but I will go and help him." "To be sure you will. I reckoned upon you, and still further believe that when we are once at Toulon you will not let him depart alone." "Oh," said Athos, shaking his head. "Patience, patience. Monseigneur, permit us to take our leave." "Begone then, and may my good luck attend you." "Adieu." "Monseigneur, and may your own good luck attend you likewise." "Here is an expedition admirably commenced," said Athos to his son. "No provisions, no store flotilla. What can be done thus?" "Humph!" murmured Raoul. "If all are going to do as I am, provisions will not be wanted." "Monsieur," replied Athos sternly, "do not be unjust and senseless in your egotism or your grief, whichever you please to call it. If you set out for this war solely with the intention of getting killed therein, you stand in need of nobody, and it was scarcely worth while to recommend you to M. de Beaufort. But when you have been introduced to the prime commandant, when you have accepted the responsibility of a post in his army, the question is no longer about you, but about all those poor soldiers, who, as well as you, have hearts and bodies, who will weep for their country and endure all the necessities of their condition. Remember, Raoul, that officers are ministers as useful to the world as priests, and that they ought to have more charity. Monsieur, I know it and have practiced it. I would have continued to do so still, but you forget also that you are of a country that is proud of its military glory. Go and die if you like, but do not die without honor and without advantage to France. Cheer up, Raoul. Do not let my words grieve you. I love you and wish to see you perfect." "I love your reproaches, monsieur," said the young man mildly. "They alone may cure me because they prove to me that someone loves me still. And now, Raoul, let us be off. The weather is so fine, the heavens so clear, those heavens which we always find above our heads, which you will see more clear still at Gigelli, and which will speak to you of me there, as they speak to me here of God." The two gentlemen, after having agreed on this point, talked over the wild freaks of the Duke, convinced that France would be served in a very incomplete manner, as regarded both spirit and practice, in the ensuing expedition, and having summed up the ducal policy under the one word vanity, they set forward, in obedience rather to their will than destiny. The sacrifice was half accomplished.